My wife went on a date with another man and said it was just friendship. I answered her in kind, but the consequences were much worse. My wife Lucy really got into trouble when she started making an idiot out of me. We had been married for a long time, and up until then, life was good. We had the house, the cars, the vacations, and yes, the occasional luxury. Everything a couple could want. But somehow, Lucy decided to cross the line and I had to take tough measures. Oh yes, I didn't just punish her legally but emotionally too. She won't forget this one for a long time. It all started when I noticed Lucy had this friend. A guy named Mark. He was a colleague of hers from work, one of those modern types who wear skinny ties and act like they're saving the world because they drink organic coffee. Anyway, Lucy had been meeting him more often lately. At first, it was just coffee, or so she said. Then it was dinners. Restaurants, always something. You have nothing to worry about, sweetheart. She'd say with that smile that made me feel like an idiot for even asking. He's just a friend, right? Just a friend. Sure, because every friend texts you at midnight to discuss work projects, right? Oh, and how could I forget the time she spent an entire Saturday evening helping him move into his new apartment? That was a new one for me. Apparently moving boxes requires candlelight dinners these days. But the kicker was when I caught them at our usual restaurant. The place where Lucy and I used to go every anniversary. And there she was, sitting with her friend, Mark, laughing like a schoolgirl, acting like she didn't have a husband, sitting at home wondering what kind of joke he had become. I asked her about it later. She smiled sweetly, just like before, and said, "It's nothing, just friendship." So there I was, sitting in my recliner, trying to make sense of things. Lucy and Mark, huh? This friendship of theirs wasn't sitting well with me. I mean, how many times does a friend need help with his difficult fate before it turns into a soap opera? Lucy kept talking about how young Mark was and how he was going through a rough patch. The kid's in his 30s. For crying out loud, he should be bouncing back from rough patches faster than a tennis ball at Wimbledon. Lucy, of course, was playing the perfect wife, sweet as sugar and twice as sticky. "Oh honey, she'd coo. You know Mark's been struggling. He just needs a little help right now." Yeah, and by help, I was pretty sure she meant my hard-earned cash. You see, Lucy wasn't exactly bringing home the bacon. No, that was my job. I was the one grinding away while she was out there playing Florence Nightingale to some guy who probably still needed his mom to iron his shirts. I couldn't take it anymore. This whole situation was messing with my head. I had to know the truth. So I decided to get creative. Enter the private detective, a man named Doug, who looked like he could find a needle in a haystack while eating a sandwich. He wasn't cheap, but at this point, I figured it was a solid investment in my sanity. "Just find out what's going on," I told him, trying to sound casual, as if hiring a detective was something I did every Tuesday. Doug nodded, "All business. Don't worry, I'll get you the info." And with that, he was off like a bloodhound on the trail of a squirrel. Meanwhile, back at home, Lucy was acting like an absolute saint. Every time I brought up Mark, she'd sigh dramatically, like she was being so incredibly noble by helping him out. "He's just so lost right now," she'd say, staring out the window like she was auditioning for a Lifetime movie. "He doesn't have anyone else." Yeah, sure, nobody else but my wife and, apparently, my wallet. I had my suspicions that Lucy wasn't just helping him with his emotional crises, but his financial ones too. She wasn't exactly tight with her purse strings, and why would she be? I was the one refilling the family coffers. And as far as I could tell, Mark had all the financial savvy of a guy who thinks budget is a type of sandwich meat. Every time I saw Lucy these days, I couldn't help but picture her holding a bag of my money in one hand and Mark's hand in the other. It was getting harder and harder to pretend everything was normal, but I kept my cool. Barely. I was just waiting for Doug to give me the news, hoping he'd find something concrete. Something that would let me teach Lucy and her young lover a lesson they wouldn't forget. And so I waited, and waited, trying to hold it together while Lucy played the innocent angel, fluttering around the house like she hadn't a care in the world. But I knew better. I knew there was more going on beneath that halo of hers. I just needed Doug to confirm it. Now, let me clear something up before we go any further. Lucy wasn't talking about Mark all the time. No. She had a life. She had other things to do, you know? She wasn't sitting there day and night singing. Oh, poor Mark. But when you look back on it, hindsight being 20/20 and all, it becomes obvious. Every time she mentioned some vague meeting with a friend or someone from work, it was like a neon sign flashing, Mark above her head. But at the time, I didn't catch on. Not fully anyway. I realize I'm telling this story in a bit of a confused way. I guess it's because I'm still wrapping my head around the whole situation. This wasn't just some quick, 2-week fling. Oh no, it dragged on for months. Months of Lucy running around, meeting clients or grabbing coffee with random people I'd never met. Now I realize half those people probably didn't exist. She was out there creating characters like she was the star of her own bad sitcom and I was the oblivious husband in the background, nodding along. She'd say, "Oh, I've got lunch with Rebecca from the gym." Yeah, Rebecca. Sure. Then 2 hours later, she'd come home smelling like some fancy cologne. Definitely not mine, by the way. I wasn't born yesterday. And then there were the meetings with her book club. If they were reading any books, I'm pretty sure they were romance novels where all the main characters had suspiciously similar names to Mark. The thing is, even back then, I felt it in my gut. You know how you get that sixth sense when something's off? It's like when you open the fridge and that weird smell hits you, but you can't figure out which leftover is the culprit. Yeah, that was me with Lucy. I knew she was playing me for a fool. That's why I was waiting on Doug, my trusty detective, to get me the dirty details. I needed the full story before I could act. And let me tell you, waiting for those details was like waiting for the last donut in the break room to be free agonizing. I wanted to charge in there, confront her, and say, "Aha! I know you're sneaking around with your little project boy." But no, I had to be patient. I needed Doug to come back with all the juicy evidence, every sordid detail of their not-so-innocent friendship. So, time passed while Lucy continued her little game of let's see how long I can fool my husband. It was almost impressive how good she was at acting innocent. You'd think she was auditioning for an award, maybe best performance in the I'm just helping my friend category. But I kept my cool, waiting for Doug, my private detective, to show up with the goods. And boy, did he deliver. One fine afternoon, Doug called. "I've got everything you need," he said, in the kind of tone that made me imagine he was wearing sunglasses even indoors. We met up at some little cafe and Doug slid over a folder. Felt like a scene from an old spy movie. All I needed was a trench coat and a mysterious briefcase. The contents of that folder? Exactly what I suspected. Banal and boring with a side of sleaze. Turns out that Lucy and Mark's friendship was textbook, secret meetings, candlelit dinners, and, of course, intimacy. You know, the usual sex for friendship kind of deal. Mark was your average guy who had a particular fondness for older women, especially if they came with a side of cash. The kid had no shame. He knew exactly what he was doing. Meanwhile, Lucy, oh, poor Lucy, was apparently looking for something a bit more exciting. Her well-fed, comfortable life had gotten too boring, I guess. What's a girl to do when her mansion and luxury vacations just don't cut it anymore? Of course. She goes looking for excitement with a younger guy who probably wears skinny jeans and still listens to pop punk. And me? I was just sitting there, flipping through photos of their little romance like I was going through vacation postcards. They weren't even discreet about it, meeting in the same places we used to go, acting like they were starring in their own soap opera. It was also painfully obvious in hindsight. Doug had everything. Photos, videos, text messages. Enough evidence to sink a ship. And now that I had it all, I had only one thought in my mind. Revenge. Not just any revenge, though. No. I was going to do it elegantly. Lucy wanted to play games? Fine. I could play too. Step 1. I called up a lawyer, our real bulldog of a guy. You know the type. Someone who could argue with a brick wall and win. I had him start preparing the divorce papers because, trust me, Lucy was not getting off the hook easily. Oh no. This wasn't just going to be some quick sign here, we're done situation. I wanted her to feel the sting of her choices. But before the legal hammer came down, I had a little fun in mind. If Lucy thought she could mess around behind my back and get away with it, well, it was time to show her that I, too, could have friends. You know, for friendship. I had an idea brewing, something clever, something memorable. After all, if she wanted excitement, I was going to give it to her. But that part of the story? Oh, you'll have to wait for that. Trust me, it's going to be worth it. as I prepare to tell you about my revenge. Then you right now please subscribe to the channel. So, I decided it was time to hit Lucy with a surprise so good, so stunning. She'd be left speechless. Something that would make her realize she wasn't the only one capable of playing games. That's when the idea struck me. Party. Not just any party, though. I was thinking of throwing the kind of party that would make her head spin. A wild, poolside bash with half-naked girls, young guys, and enough booze to fill a small lake. I figured if Lucy could have her little adventures with Mark, well, I had friends, too. Young, energetic friends. Enter my good buddy Sam. A man who could organize a circus in a broom closet if you gave him an hour's notice. Sam, I said, grinning as I shared my genius plan, I need you to help me throw a party. And I'm not talking about a casual get-together. I mean a student party. The kind with a questionable moral compass. You know, as depraved as possible. Sam's eyes lit up like I just offered him front row tickets to the Super Bowl. Oh, I've got you covered, man. This'll be epic. I know exactly where to find the right people. It's gonna be like the college days, but with a lot more bad decisions. That's exactly what I need. I laughed. Sam was always reliable when it came to throwing a party. You could ask him for a nice, quiet dinner, and he'd somehow turn it into a full-blown rave. So I left the planning to him, knowing I was in good hands. Now, for my part, I had to set Lucy up for the big surprise. I played the role of the sweet, romantic husband like I was auditioning for the lead in a Hallmark movie. Hey, honey, I said, flashing my best innocent smile. Why don't we go out to dinner tonight? Just the two of us. I've got a little surprise for you. Lucy, of course, took the bait. How could she not? After months of sneaking around with Mark, I'm sure she thought I was just being my usual coolest self. So, she agreed, probably expecting some grand romantic gesture. Oh, she was gonna get a gesture, all right. While she was at work, Sam and his merry band of partiers showed up at the house. I'm talking a full-on production, bar counter, drinks flowing like Niagara Falls, loud music, and a crowd of young people who looked like they had just stepped out of a reality TV show about terrible life choices. And let's not forget the pool. A giant inflatable flamingo was floating around like it owned the place. It was perfect. Meanwhile, Lucy was sitting down at a fancy restaurant, waiting for me to show up. On the table in front of her was a beautiful red box, her surprise. She sent me a message, "Where are you?" "I'm at the restaurant." I replied casually like I was talking about going to the grocery store. "Oh, sorry, babe. I have an urgent meeting with my friends. Can't make it. But hey, check out the surprise I left you." I could practically feel her confusion through the phone. But she opened the box anyway, expecting something romantic, a diamond necklace or whatever it is she fantasized about these days. Instead, she found a gorgeous chocolate dessert in the shape of a diamond heart. But here's the kicker. Instead of a cherry on top, there was our wedding ring sawed into pieces. I imagine Lucy's face at that moment was priceless. Shock, horror, and confusion all rolled into one. She stood up in a fury, ready to storm out of the restaurant like some kind of betrayed soap opera star. But there was a twist. Security stopped her at the door. "Ma'am, you'll need to settle your bill before leaving," they said. That's right. I made sure she'd have to pay for her own little emotional roller coaster. I'd slipped a little extra cash to the waiter to arrange the whole thing and to make sure it was all filmed, streamed live to me back at the house. I watched the scene unfold, laughing so hard I nearly fell off the bed. Oh, it was glorious. There she was, looking furious, digging through her purse to pay for the performance I had so masterfully orchestrated. Meanwhile, I waiting for the grand finale. And just to make it official, I had my lawyer standing by with divorce papers, ready to go. Lucy, not thoroughly humiliated, paid the bill, stormed out of the restaurant, and headed home. She tried calling me, of course, but I didn't pick up. Why spoil the fun? Now, all that was left was for Lucy to come back to the house, where her real surprise, complete with a wild party, a house full of strangers, and me waiting with divorce papers, was ready to greet her. I knew Lucy was close. I had to act fast. So, I ran out to the backyard where the party was already in full swing. The pool area looked like something straight out of a bad college movie. Half-naked girls splashing around, some without bras, while the guys were shouting and drinking like they'd won the lottery. It was perfect. "Hey guys," I shouted over the music. "This party is for you, and trust me, I'll be joining soon enough. But first, I've got a little task for you." The guys, already a few drinks in, looked at me like I was their fearless leader. "What's up, boss?" one of them yelled, raising a beer bottle in the air. "All right, listen," I said, trying to keep a straight face. "In about 5 minutes, my lovely wife is going to show up. Now, here's the plan. She loves this kind of thing, so as soon as she walks in, I need you to hand her a drink and throw her into the pool. No hesitation." "Got it." The group of them looked at me, then at each other, and grinned like a bunch of mischievous schoolboys. "Yes, boss," they shouted in unison, like we were about to pull off the greatest prank of the century. I glanced over at the pool, where the girls were giggling and splashing around, barely dressed. One of them lost her bikini top, and instead of embarrassment, she just tossed it like it was part of the fun. This was a circus, and I was the ringmaster. Watching this whole spectacle, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction bubbling up. Revenge was sweet, and this was about to be legendary. I rushed back inside to set the final scene. In the bedroom, I connected my TV to the video compilation Doug, the detective, had put together the greatest hits of Lucy and Mark, caught in their not-so-innocent moments. Every sneaky meeting, every smirk, every kiss. And to top it off, I hooked up a speaker and queued up some sound effects. Not just any sound effects, mind you. Adult film sounds, moans and groans of pleasure that would make any sane person's ears burn. I wanted Lucy to walk in and think I was having the time of my life with some of those party girls. My lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the corner reviewing papers, looked up when the sounds kicked in. He laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. "Are you serious with this?" he asked, holding his head like he was torn between professional shame and pure amusement. "Serious as a heart attack," I grinned, adjusting the speaker for maximum effect. "She deserves this." Then I peeked through the window, and there she was, storming out of her car, her face red with rage. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Lucy charged into the backyard like a hurricane, but she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the scene in front of her. Young guys chugging drinks, girls bouncing around the pool in skimpy bikinis, and the music blasting so loud you could hear it 3 streets over. Her jaw practically hit the ground. The guys spotted her immediately. True to their word, they sprang into action. One of them handed her a cup filled with God knows what kind of alcohol, and before she could even say they grabbed her by the arms and flung her into the pool. Splash. She hit the water, drenched from head to toe, sputtering like a wet cat. Another guy, completely in the spirit of things, climbed up on the diving board and poured a bottle of something over her head from above. The look on her face was pure gold, shocked, furious, and utterly bewildered. "I'll call the police," she screamed, flailing around in the water. "This is outrageous." The other partygoers were too busy laughing and having the time of their lives to pay attention to her threats. She finally managed to scramble out of the pool, hair dripping, makeup running down her face, cursing like a sailor. I watched from the window, laughing so hard I could barely stand. It was a beautiful scene. She was soaked, humiliated, and livid. And the best part? It wasn't over yet. Lucy stormed into the house, dripping water all over the floor, and started screaming my name. "Where are you, you bastard?" she shouted, making a beeline for the bedroom. Oh, she was mad now. But as she approached the bedroom door, all she could hear were those sounds. The moans, the gasps, the unmistakable soundtrack of what she thought was me, having an incredibly good time with someone else. She burst into the room, expecting to catch me red-handed. But instead, she was met with the TV playing her Betrayal on loop. And, of course, the cherry on top, those absurd adult film sounds booming through the speaker. Her face twisted with fury. "What the hell are you doing, Bruce? Are you crazy?" she screamed, looking between the TV playing her greatest hits with Mark and the ridiculous moaning sounds still echoing through the speaker. I shrugged, trying to keep a straight face. "Oh, just trying to find the perfect audio track for this fantastic little movie. You might recognize the lead actress. She's been getting a lot of screen time with her friend Mark." I gave her my best innocent smile, like this was all just a fun little project. Lucy's face turned beet red, and she looked like she was about to explode. She started pacing, flailing her arms, and throwing a full-blown tantrum. It was like watching a toddler who'd lost her favorite toy, except this toy was my trust and all the money she'd been sneaking to Mark. "Don't you dare turn this on me," she shrieked, her voice hitting an octave that probably scared birds out of nearby trees. "You're insane, Bruce. This is harassment. I'll sue you for this." "Oh, sue me? You mean like this?" I said, nodding toward the door where my lawyer, who had been enjoying the show from the sidelines, casually stepped forward with the divorce papers in hand. "Lucy, meet my lawyer. He's got something for you." "No, it's not a birthday card." The lawyer handed her the documents with a smile that could have sold toothpaste. Lucy stared at them like they were ticking bombs, her face contorting with anger. "You've got to be kidding me," she screamed, her voice cracking. I grinned, and just for the dramatic effect, I slowly began unbuttoning my shirt and pulling off my pants, revealing my stylish swimming trunks underneath. I stood there, bare-chested, while Lucy looked at me like I'd finally lost my mind. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, tossing my shirt onto the bed. "My friends are waiting for me by the pool. You know how important friendship is, Lucy. I wouldn't want to keep them waiting." I winked and headed for the door, leaving Lucy standing there, her face a mix of shock, rage, and disbelief. She tried to process everything, her eyes darting between me, the lawyer, and the papers, but I was already halfway out the door. I paused for one last parting shot. "Oh, and Lucy, don't worry about it. I'm sure you and Mark will have a great life together. I just hope your salary is enough to rent a fancy doghouse because you two will be best friends every night now." With a laugh, I walked out, leaving her to stew in the mess she'd made. Outside, the party was in full swing. I joined the guys by the pool, the music was thumping, and tequila shots were flowing. One of the girls leaned over, offered me a lick of salt off her chest, and handed me a tequila shot, which I gladly accepted. Life was good. Just as I was getting into the spirit of things, I saw Lucy storming out of the house, clutching the divorce papers like they were on fire. She stood there, dripping wet from her earlier dunk in the pool, watching me, tequila in one hand, a party girl in the other, like she just walked into the Twilight Zone. "You'll regret this, Bruce," she yelled, shaking the papers in the air. "I'll make sure you pay for this." I just raised my tequila glass and a mock toast. "Cheers, Lucy. Drive safe. And tell Mark I said hi." Fuming, she stomped off to her car, practically screeching the tires as she peeled out of the driveway. A few minutes later, my lawyer joined me by the pool, still chuckling from the show. "Well," he said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye, "she didn't take that too well. But don't worry, at the trial we'll make sure she walks away with nothing." The next month was nothing short of a grand spectacle. A divorce so dramatic it could have had its own reality TV show. My lawyer, bless his shark-like soul, absolutely raged in court. He threw legal jargon around like confetti at a parade, leaving Lucy's lawyer scrambling to keep up. It was beautiful, honestly. I almost felt bad for Lucy. Almost. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Lucy walked away with a small share, just enough for her to get by for a while. I imagine she'll be budgeting for ramen noodles before long. As for me, I'm a free man. No more sneaking suspicions, no more games, no more sitting around feeling like an idiot while my wife played house with her younger friend. So here's the moral of the story. Folks, if you've got a husband who trusts you and treats you right, maybe don't try to make an idiot out of him. It won't end well. Just ask Lucy. Anyway, that's my tale. If you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. All the best to you, and remember, tequila and karma make for a fantastic combination. Now start next story. It was a crisp Friday morning, the kind where the air is filled with the promise of fresh starts. But for me, it was yet another day of staring into the fragile remains of my marriage. The night before, my wife Linda had brought up her plans again, to go on a date with another man. She used the word date, which made the whole thing even more absurd. Here I was, married for nearly 12 years, and my wife was looking to relive the thrill of her 20s, the excitement, the forbidden taste of something new. She didn't say it explicitly, but her intentions were clear. This wasn't about us, this was about her. I had stood in the doorway, folding my arms across my chest as she spoke, explaining her justifications in the same nonchalant tone she used when explaining why she bought that pricey handbag last year. She had earned it, she said. She deserved a break, a release. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because I knew there was no changing her mind. Linda had already made her decision. "You're okay with this, right, Ron?" she asked, her voice almost hopeful, her eyes locking onto mine, searching for some affirmation. I paused, sighed deeply, then spoke in a calm tone. "Linda, you've already decided, haven't you? It's not like I control you, you're your own person." Linda was surprised, clearly not expecting this tone. "Of course I mind," I continued. "But I know you, Linda, you've decided to see this through no matter what. What choice do I have?" She gave me a small smile, almost relieved. "I love you, Ron. I'll make amends, you'll see," she said. I clenched my jaw, nodding. "So, you know it's wrong then? What do you mean?" She furrowed her brows, confusion across her face. "Do you think our parents would agree with what you're doing?" I asked, voice steady. Linda didn't answer. She lowered her eyes, silence settling between us. That was my cue to let her words linger in her consciousness, to let her think about how twisted this was. I leaned in, speaking softly. "You know it's wrong, Linda, you just admitted it." She shifted uncomfortably, her voice betraying uncertainty. "But you said I could do it, Ron." "No, I never said that. All I admitted was that I can't stop you." My words hung heavily in the air. "But I do not approve in any way." Her expression turned defensive. "I thought you would understand." "I do understand," I replied, my tone measured. "I understand that you want to be with someone else. You want to feel that thrill. I get it. What I don't get is why you have to do this to us. You're choosing someone else's company over mine." Linda's eyes darted to the side, avoiding my gaze. She was quiet again, and that silence spoke volumes. Finally, I asked, "By the way, what's his name?" "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "It doesn't matter?" I laughed bitterly. "Of course it matters. Whoever he is, he's going to change everything." I hesitated before continuing. "Just know this, Linda. I don't want you to go out with him, and your date will have consequences." "What consequences?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just beautiful, Linda. You're also intelligent," I said, my eyes narrowing slightly. "I've always told you that. Apparently, you think I say it only because I have to, but I mean it. I'm giving you the responsibility of dealing with the consequences of this decision." She frowned, almost as if she was gauging my seriousness. "You're bluffing. You love me. You always give me what I want." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "I can't stop you from doing stupid things, Linda, but you've been warned. You're on your own for this one." With that, I grabbed my keys and left before she could say anything else. Thursday evening came, and I packed my belongings into a suitcase, carrying it into the guest room. Linda found me halfway through packing. "What are you doing, Ron?" she asked, her voice incredulous. "Moving out of our bedroom," I replied coldly, barely glancing at her. Her voice wavered between anger and disbelief. "Are you really throwing a tantrum like a child?" Without another word, I hung my clothes in the guest room closet and continued packing, not bothering to respond to her taunts. Friday morning, I woke early. This day would be different, and I intended to make it so. I left the house and went to a high-end salon. For the first time in what felt like ages, I got a professional haircut, had my beard meticulously shaved, and even had a manicure. At the clothing store next door, I bought myself a casual yet elegant outfit, a navy blazer, white shirt, and matching trousers. I was done looking like the man who was just waiting around. I then took my old car to the car wash, watching as it transformed into something presentable, something that reflected who I wanted to be. A man ready to face the consequences Linda set into motion. By the time I got home, Linda was just getting ready for her date. She came downstairs in a new dress I hadn't seen before. It was black, tight, and revealed more of her than she'd ever shown in public before. She paused on the last step, waiting for me to compliment her. I remained silent, my eyes cold. "Damn it, Ron," she said, a hint of desperation in her voice. "You look good. Where are you going?" "Out," I said, my voice dripping with indifference. "Out where?" she pressed, her tone rising. "Just out," I repeated. "What did you expect me to do? Sit around here while you run off to your new lover?" I shook my head slowly, my eyes piercing hers. "And here I thought you were smarter than this." Linda's face flushed, but she kept her composure. "Fine, I'm going. Don't let your ego get in the way." I smiled faintly, opening the garage door. "Don't worry about me, Linda. Just remember, there are always consequences." She turned on her heel and left without another word. I waited until she drove off before I made my way to meet someone who I had grown closer to over the past few months. Ava. Ava worked at my office, and we had always gotten along. Our laughter and shared moments never anything beyond friendly until recently. With Linda's actions, I found myself naturally drifting toward Ava's warmth and understanding. We met at a wine bar, a cozy little place where the dim lighting and soft jazz music allowed for easy conversation. Ava smiled when she saw me, her eyes lighting up in a way that made me feel valued. We ordered light dinners and a bottle of wine, and before long we were laughing like old friends. Ava was different. She appreciated my sense of humor in a way that Linda never did. We shared stories, danced to the gentle music, and more than once, our eyes lingered on each other's longer than necessary. I wasn't trying to replace Linda. I was simply trying to find a way to not feel broken. By the time I dropped Ava off at her apartment, it was nearly 10. Before leaving, she reached over, leaving a gentle kiss on my cheek, her lips brushing just enough to leave a faint mark. "Go and get her, Ron," she whispered with a playful smile. When I got home, Linda was already waiting. She was still dressed in her date outfit, her eyes wide with surprise. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded. "Not your business," I said casually, hanging my blazer on the back of a chair. Linda's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean, not my business? You didn't tell me you were going anywhere." I laughed dryly. "Did you tell me where you were going tonight?" "Linda, should I ask if he used a condom? Or should I just not care? 'Cause I don't plan on touching you ever again. It doesn't matter to me what you did or where you went." Linda stared at me, her mouth agape. "What is this?" she demanded. "Who were you with?" "Her name is Eva," I replied, my tone measured and calm. "If your idea of marriage is to dress up for some random guy, I figured I'd do the same. The only difference is that I was honest enough to tell you her name." Linda's eyes filled with tears, and her voice cracked. You're trying to make me jealous?" I shrugged. "I'm just doing what you did. Only I'm not hiding anything." Tears rolled down her cheeks, her makeup smudging. "Ron, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think it would come to this." I shook my head slowly, the disappointment settling in my chest. "I warned you, Linda, there are consequences." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, and I felt a pang of something close to regret. But I knew there was no going back now. The trust was shattered, and I had no intention of pretending anymore. Linda looked up, her face wet with tears. "What now?" "Now," I said, taking a deep breath. "Now, you figure out what you want and I do the same. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a lawyer. We'll split everything and you can have your freedom." She choked back a sob, and I turned away, heading up the stairs to the guest room. There was nothing left to say, not tonight. This was only the beginning, but whatever came next, I would be ready. And Linda, well, she would have to live with the choices she made. I woke up early the next morning, sunlight peeking through the guest room curtains. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind, a heavy reminder of how my life had changed in such a short time. I knew I had to move forward, but I couldn't let go of the anger boiling inside me. Linda's betrayal wasn't something I could forgive, and today, she would learn what it meant to cross me. First, I called my lawyer, Jason, and scheduled an urgent appointment. He was a friend from college who had always looked out for me, and I knew I could trust him with what was to come. After a quick shower, I dressed in jeans and a crisp shirt, ready to make a statement. When I stepped into the living room, Linda was already there. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy and her expression hollow. She hadn't slept, and for a brief moment I almost felt pity, almost. "Ron," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we talk?" I looked at her, a slight smirk forming on my face. "Sure, Linda, let's talk about consequences. What would you like to say?" She hesitated, biting her lower lip. I'm sorry for last night. I shouldn't have gone. It was stupid, and I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Linda, you made your choice. You chose excitement over our marriage, over me." She started to cry, her shoulders slumping forward. I thought I wanted something else, but I realized it was all a mistake. "Please, Ron, give me another chance." I stared at her, the words leaving my mouth devoid of emotion. "Another chance? Do you honestly think I'm that naive?" Before she could respond, I turned and walked out the door. There was no point in listening to more of her lies. Today was about reclaiming my power. The first stop was my lawyer's office. Jason greeted me with a firm handshake and a sympathetic nod. He listened quietly as I laid out the entire story. Linda's betrayal, her actions, my confrontation, and my plans for moving forward. "Ron, if you're sure about this, we can draft the paperwork today," Jason said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll start with a formal notice, and if she contests, we can escalate things." I nodded, a determination taking root inside me. I want everything in motion by the end of the day. I'm done playing games. Jason agreed, and I signed the initial documents. As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of freedom mixed with rage. This wasn't just about divorce. It was about showing Linda exactly what she had thrown away. Next, I called my old friend, Jake. Jake had a reputation, one that most people didn't know about. He was the kind of guy who could make problems disappear, the kind of guy you called when you wanted to make a statement without leaving a trace. "Jake," I said, my voice low, "I need your help." He didn't ask many questions, he never did. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town. Jake sat there, his tattooed arms folded across his chest, a knowing smirk on his face. "You look like hell, man," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. I chuckled darkly. "Feels about right. Listen, I need you to send a message to someone." Jake nodded, listening as I laid out the details. Kevin South, the man Linda had been with, his car, his habits. Jake smiled, that wicked grin that promised results. "Consider it done," he said, standing up and tossing a few bills on the table for our coffee. "No one screws you over, Ron. I'll make sure he remembers this." By the time I returned home, it was late afternoon. Linda was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring blankly at her phone. She looked up when I entered, her eyes hopeful. "Ron, where have you been? We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "No, Linda, I've done all the talking I'm going to do. My lawyer will be in touch, we're done." Her face went pale and she stood up, her hands shaking. "You're really going to divorce me?" I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "Yes, and that's not all." She looked confused, her eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" "You'll see soon enough," I replied, walking past her, grabbing my keys and heading out again. That night, I parked my car a few blocks from Kevin South's building. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. It didn't take long. Jake and his crew were efficient. Kevin's car sat in the parking lot, or rather what was left of it. The windows were smashed, the tires slashed, and the paint was scraped off, leaving deep scars on the metal. But the real masterpiece was what they had done to the interior. Baby powder, glue, and God knows what else. They had made sure Kevin wouldn't be driving it anytime soon. As I watched from a distance, Kevin came out of the building. He froze at the sight of his car, his mouth opening in shock. His face turned red, and I saw him pull out his phone, probably to call the police. But I knew they wouldn't find anything. Jake's crew was thorough. I felt a sense of satisfaction settle in my chest. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up early and packed up the rest of my things. Linda was still asleep, her face blotchy from crying. I didn't bother waking her up. Instead, I left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, along with a note that simply read, "You wanted freedom. Here it is. I loaded my suitcase into my car and drove to Eva's place. She had offered me her spare room until I figured things out, and I was grateful, but this wasn't about moving on just yet. This was about making sure Linda understood the full weight of her actions. By the time Linda woke up, she had already received a notice from my lawyer. She called me, her voice panicked, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in hearing her pleas anymore. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Eva. "Linda's at the door. Should I let her in?" I texted back, "No, she made her choice. I'm making mine." Linda had to learn that the world didn't revolve around her desires, that there were consequences for betrayal, and they were far-reaching. The following week, I moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Linda tried to fight it, of course. She called, she texted, she even tried showing up at my work. But I was prepared. My lawyer was ruthless, and I made sure Linda understood that she wouldn't be getting a single extra cent from me. The house lease was up in 3 months, and she could deal with finding a new place. I didn't care anymore. And then, one day, Linda came to my work parking lot. I saw her standing there, tears streaming down her face, waiting by my car. I walked past her, not even sparing her a glance. She called my name, her voice breaking, but I kept walking. "You were right, Ron," she yelled after me. "I'm a fool, I was stupid. Please, I'm begging you." I stopped, turning to look at her. Her eyes were red, her face desperate. I took a deep breath. "Linda, it's over. You made your choice and I'm making mine. I won't let you back into my life." She sobbed, collapsing to her knees, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of regret. But then I remembered Kevin, the betrayal, the lies, the selfishness, and the regret vanished. I turned away, leaving her behind, walking into the building with a sense of finality. Ava and I continued to see each other casually, but we both knew that what we had was more about comfort than long-term love. Eventually, we parted on good terms, both realizing we wanted different things. I moved into a townhouse near my work, a fresh start that gave me the space I needed. Months later at the gym, I met Sophie. She was different, strong, confident, and fiercely loyal. We grew close, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. There were no lies, no games, just two people who had found each other amidst the wreckage of their pasts. Linda moved out of state, and I never saw her again. Kevin, on the other hand, had to deal with more than just a vandalized car. He left the company after rumors started spreading about his affairs. And last I heard, he moved somewhere far enough to start over without the baggage of his reputation. And me? I learned that love isn't just about giving. It's also about knowing when to walk away. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to let the person who broke you feel the weight of their choices. Now start next story. Welcome to the Cheating Channel. If you think this is one of those stories about a man fantasizing about another man sleeping with his wife, you should stop reading right now and not waste your time on the rest of the narrative. I'm a regular, ordinary husband who loves his wife and 2 kids. I'm a typical white guy from the middle class, standing 180 centimeters tall and weighing 80 kilograms. I don't act like a macho guy, but I also never complain. I have a good job in sales, and my family is usually well provided for. My wife N and I have been together for 8 wonderful years. To me, she is the hottest woman in the neighborhood. At 168 centimeters tall, weighing 57 kilograms, and with a stunning figure, she's got the kind of body that's perfect for intimacy. After all these years, I still call her my bride because I feel like we're still in our honeymoon phase, and once told me that when we met, it wasn't love, it was lust. She couldn't wait to win me over. I had just come out of a long-term relationship and wanted to take things slow. Her idea of taking it slow was getting very close to me on our first date. We reached a compromise and things progressed quickly on our second date. We got married 6 months later and settled into the routine of working, studying, and working some more to make ends meet, and was a first-year teacher, and since she wasn't making a lot of money, I worked 2 part-time jobs while finishing college. A year later, I got my degree and landed a decent job. The money didn't rain from the sky, but we were doing fine. After the birth of our 2 children, I felt like I was on top of the world. I thought life couldn't get any better, and that's when I first noticed a shift in our relationship. It was subtle but still a change. When you're constantly with someone day in and day out, sometimes you don't notice small changes. They sort of sneak up on you and happen when you're not looking. Our intimate life had always been fantastic over the years, but recently, it started to decline. It was as if and was losing interest in physical intimacy, if that was even possible. Who could get tired of intimacy? I thought. My wife could excite me with just a glance, and I was always ready for her to sweep me off my feet. Even though she was a few years older than me, her body still looked amazing. I was a fan of expressing my affection physically, always eager to show my love, and, however, was a bit more reserved, especially when someone else was in the house. She was quite vocal when we were alone, but she made sure to be more discreet when we had guests or if the kids were still awake. Nevertheless, I always tried to be affectionate whenever I had the chance. I had learned something early on: you never get a second chance to truly impress someone unless you make that first moment count. I made it a goal in life to always be confident with my partner, ensuring that she experienced pleasure first. This mindset helped me become quite skilled in showing affection through intimacy. The key was not to rush and to focus on what you were doing. After I undressed a woman, I would start with small kisses on her lips, ears, and the base of her neck. Passionate, deep kisses would quickly ignite the spark, making her feel desired. What really heightened the experience were gentle, tender touches that built up the tension. It only took a few minutes, and I noticed the moisture forming, signaling her excitement. Anne was a bit old-fashioned, preferring a natural look, and had only shaved once before the birth of our second child. This had never really bothered me. As I gently moved closer to her, I focused on making sure she was comfortable and happy. I liked to take my time, creating a playful and enjoyable atmosphere. "Come on, just get on with it already," she would jokingly say when I took my time to make her feel special. I always made sure to focus on what she liked, ensuring that she felt completely cared for. Finding the right position helped, and I was always attentive to her reactions, doing my best to make the moment meaningful. While I worked to make her happy, I added gentle touches to make things even more enjoyable. It usually didn't take long before she felt fully satisfied, and I loved seeing the look of contentment on her face afterward. I sometimes wondered if the neighbors ever heard her playful comments like, "Come on, harder." She had a way of expressing herself with such enthusiasm that it made me smile. I wasn't a superhero and I could only keep up for so long, but I always did my best. Afterward, exhausted but happy, I would look at her and enjoy the peaceful expression on her face. I'd ask, "Are you ready for round 2? Are you kidding? You've worn me out," she'd often laugh and say. "Besides, the second time is never as intense as the first. But wouldn't it be fun to try?" I'd reply with a grin. Sometimes she'd go along with it, but it was happening less often as time went on. Still, I didn't mind because I was in love with the most amazing woman in the world. And that brings me to my point. After 8 years together, you become familiar with your partner's body, and I knew how well mine matched with Anne's. It always felt right. However, recently, it seemed like something had shifted with Anne. At first, I thought it might have to do with the natural changes in her body. But tonight, something felt different, like the connection we usually had wasn't the same. Couldn't help but notice. Later, we had our usual chat and I asked if she enjoyed it. She reassured me, saying everything was fine and that I didn't need to worry. I mentioned in passing that things seemed a little different, but she brushed it off, saying I was overthinking it and that she wasn't as firm as she had been at 16. I hinted at trying something new, but she quickly shut that down with a smile, saying, "Not in this lifetime." Then she kissed me goodnight and drifted off to sleep. The doubts from that evening and our conversation lingered in the back of my mind. 5 days later, I had another opportunity to be intimate with her, and once again the sensations I felt made me think, and seemed to always have an excuse. The kids weren't asleep yet, she wasn't feeling well, or she didn't feel fresh enough or fully ready. If you wait until tomorrow, I promise it'll be worth your time. Tomorrow, however, never seemed to come. That brings me to the second clue that something was off. Since my wife was a teacher, I knew that every semester there were open house days and other related events. But lately, for some reason, there seemed to be more of these days than usual. Anne would say she had to stay late because of such events, and every time she'd come home 2 or 3 hours later than expected. When she returned, I'd ask her how everything went, and I'd always get the same vague answer. It's just school stuff. It never changes. I even offered to drive her to school and pick her up when it was over, and snapped back, saying I needed to stay home with the kids, and if I took them with me, they'd go to bed too late and so on. On Tuesday evening, and announced that on Wednesday, she'd need to meet with a few other teachers after dinner to discuss some new testing data. No problem, honey. I'll take care of the kids and make sure they go to bed on time. I winked at Anne and suggested, maybe we could relax a bit when you get back home. The look on her face told me I shouldn't get my hopes up. On Wednesday evening, I called Anne and told her I'd have to work late, but I arranged for Carol to come over and watch the kids while she was at her meeting. She told me not to work too late and that she hoped to see me when she got home. Little did my wife know that tonight, I planned to find out where she was really going for those meetings. I parked a little down the street, turned off the headlights, and waited for my wife to leave for her meeting. Everything was going smoothly. After dinner, she got into her car and drove off. I followed her at a safe distance, making sure she couldn't see me. For about 15 minutes, I trailed behind her until she pulled into the driveway of a house we had never been to. Or at least I had never been there. Parking on the street, I waited what felt like an eternity. I wanted to give her enough time in case others were supposed to show up. But no one else did. Gathering all the courage I could muster, I quietly got out of the car and approached the house. I pulled out a notepad and jotted down the house number. Why? Who knows? I was new to this kind of detective work. Without a real plan in mind, I approached the front of the house and tried to peek through the windows. Damn curtains, I muttered under my breath as they blocked any view inside, though I could hear voices. I moved to the side, slowly circling the house until I reached the back. There was a pool in the backyard, and I noticed that the sliding glass door leading out to it was slightly open. Lucky for me, it wasn't locked. I cautiously crept closer to get a better look. Oh, no way. Peering through the glass, I saw my sweet and supposedly faithful wife with another man, kneeling on the living room carpet, completely naked. She was with him in a way I never imagined. The man was giving her commands, and she seemed to obey without hesitation. The only sounds I could hear were her movements and his voice, saying something I couldn't make out. My thoughts raced. Who is this guy? And how could this be happening? It took all the strength I had not to burst in, knock that guy down, and drag my naked wife out to the car by her hair. Thankfully, common sense slapped me in the face before I did something so foolish. The guy was nearly 2 meters tall and must have weighed at least 110 kilograms. He would have flattened me in an instant, and what would that have accomplished? In that moment, I realized my marriage was over, and all I had left was the raging anger inside me. I didn't know who I hated more as I watched them tear my life apart. All I could think about was how to make them pay for what they had done to me. I looked up again. The lover was now between my wife's legs, clearly making her lose control. I could hear her moaning, trembling under his touch. With a loud cry, and grabbed him by the neck, pulling him closer to herself. Looking around to make sure no one could see me, I moved closer to the open doors. It would be really stupid to get caught right now, I thought to myself. I glanced at the pool and the dark backyard. Something caught my eye. There were children's toys scattered around. That jerk was married too. They weren't just destroying one family, they were wrecking two. By the time I looked back inside, the man had finished what he was doing, and I heard him say, "I want you now, let's not waste time," she said impatiently. He moved behind her, getting ready, and then slowly started to move closer. "Stop holding back, I want more," and urged. With a laugh, he fully embraced her in one swift move. "Take me," she whispered as she let her head fall forward. There was no hesitation in his approach, and it seemed like he was determined to make up for all the complaints she'd made earlier. At first, I could see from her expression that she wasn't entirely comfortable, but as they continued, and began to respond, matching his intensity, it was clear that she was starting to enjoy the moment. As this carried on, it began to get under my skin. Then, and shouted, "Harder, Nick." Now I had a name to go along with the face. When are you going to leave that pencil-dick husband of yours? The guy taunted, and remained silent. She was lost in her own world. At that moment, my disgust for Nick turned into pure hatred. Payback is coming for you, Nick, and I'll make sure you get exactly what's coming to you, I whispered to myself. Nick was now moving with increased intensity, and I could tell he was getting more aggressive. I noticed his focus shifting, and it made me uneasy. Oh no, I thought, is he really planning to take things further? A sense of dread crept in as I watched. Go ahead, try it, I muttered to myself. If she thought what just happened was intense, wait until she realizes what's coming next. I could see him preparing to take things in a different direction, but I wasn't sure if and knew what was about to happen. I was on edge, waiting to see her reaction, and seemed uncomfortable, and I could tell she wasn't expecting what Nick had in mind. You're too much for this, and I've never done anything like this before, she said, her voice strained. Nick just laughed and dismissed her concern. Relax, it'll be fine, he said, continuing with his rough approach. Anne's discomfort was obvious, but I couldn't look away. I was trying to make sense of everything happening and found myself instinctively reaching for my phone to capture the moment, wondering how this would all play out later. Nick continued without hesitation, and Anne's resistance gradually faded. I could tell she was still struggling with the intensity of it all. Yet, something shifted, and she eventually stopped protesting, allowing the moment to unfold. It was clear Nick was nearing the end, and Anne's silence spoke volumes. She seemed overwhelmed, but I knew she would be dealing with the aftermath later. Finally, Nick pulled away and demanded that she respond to his final request. Without hesitation, she complied, though the whole scene left me feeling conflicted. When it was all over, they both lay on the floor, trying to catch their breath, and glanced at the clock, startled by the time. Damn, I really need to get going, she muttered, as if the reality of the situation had finally hit her. That was my cue to make a quick exit so I could get home and send Carol away before and got back. Quietly slipping out the back door, I rushed to my car. Jumping in, I started the engine and drove off without turning on the headlights until I made it around the corner. To say I was angry would be an understatement. All I felt toward my wife now was hatred. I had done everything for her. She never wanted for anything. And this is how she shows her love for me, all while pretending to be a respectable wife and mother. I couldn't help but wonder what her family and friends would think if they saw what I had witnessed over the past 45 minutes. However long it takes, I'll make sure both of them pay. I sped home. Carol had already changed the kids and put them to bed before I got home. After thanking her for looking after them, I checked on the children and made sure they were fast asleep. Then, I went down to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited for Anne to return. About 30 minutes later, I heard her car pull into the garage. My wife hurried in, apologizing for being so late. I casually asked how her meeting went and where it was held. Nick, our principal, decided to host it at his place instead of at the school, she replied. Pushing for more details, I asked how many people attended. Oh, there were 7 of us from the teaching staff, she answered calmly. I offered her a glass of wine, and declined, saying she was really tired and just wanted to go to bed. I gave her a playful smile, but she stopped me in my tracks. Not tonight, honey. Maybe tomorrow, she said as she headed upstairs to our bedroom. I watched as she carefully climbed the stairs, almost as if she had something stuck in an uncomfortable place. After waiting for a bit, I went upstairs. She was already in the shower. I searched the laundry basket and found her dirty clothes. Sifting through them, I pulled out her panties. There were unmistakable signs of what had happened earlier. Deciding I might need them as proof of her betrayal, I took the underwear downstairs, placed them in a Ziploc bag, and hid them in the garage. When I returned to the bedroom and was already in bed, I undressed and lay down beside her. As soon as I touched her, she immediately shifted away, saying she needed to get some sleep. That night I barely slept. Everything I'd witnessed in that house kept replaying in my mind. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But I suppressed that feeling. Now, I had to be patient and act carefully. I needed to make sure she had no idea that I knew what kind of a liar she was. My final thought before I finally drifted into a restless sleep was that if Ann had come home and confessed everything to me, maybe we could have had a chance. But now, all I felt for that deceitful woman was disgust. The next day at work, I started putting my revenge plan together. To avoid any unnecessary public scandal, I contacted a lawyer in a neighboring town. My next step was hiring Dan, a private investigator, to follow and capture her affairs on camera. I uploaded the photos from my phone to my work computer and emailed them, along with Nick's address, to both Dan and my lawyer. After that, I made changes to all our joint bank accounts. For the next month, I played the role of a perfect husband. I was always in a good mood, took care of the kids when their mom went off to be with her lover, and continued to pay the bills without letting and know that the accounts had been altered. I stopped asking for intimacy as I had in the past. And as it turned out, that didn't seem to bother her one bit. It seemed like she was getting everything she needed elsewhere. After 6 weeks, everything was in place. All the money had been transferred to new accounts under my name alone. I left just a small amount in our joint account. Dan, my investigator, had prepared a new video showing Ann and Nick's little adventures. He took the same approach I had, but being a professional, his footage even had sound. I made 3 copies and sent one to my lawyer, along with Ann's underwear that I had stashed away that evening. Now, I was ready to set my plan in motion. However, there was one thing I was determined to accomplish before divorcing this woman. I was going to have my way with Ann's backside. She had denied me this all these years, but she had allowed Nick to take what I couldn't. By now, I figured it would be an easy task to slip inside without any resistance. On Friday, the kids asked to stay over at their friends' houses, so there were no distractions. I prepared ahead of time, including having handcuffs ready to secure her hands to the headboard. After dinner, while putting the dishes in the sink, I took Ann by the hand and told her I had a surprise for her upstairs. I blindfolded her, which surprisingly excited my wife, and led her to our bedroom. I laid her on the bed and began undressing her, and quickly realized where things were heading and tried to sit up, but I firmly pushed her back down. Just relax, I told her. Tonight, we're trying something different. I gently raised her arms and secured them to the headboard. It was clear Ann wasn't expecting this. I don't like this, she said nervously. Just go with the flow, I reassured her, trying to ease her discomfort. This evening, I had a specific plan in mind, and I wasn't too concerned about whether she enjoyed it or not. I even had a line prepared. Tonight, you're all mine. I quickly undressed and moved closer, giving her a playful command to help me get ready. As she complied, I could tell she was skilled and experienced just like before. I let her find a comfortable rhythm while I focused on other ways to make the moment more engaging for her. Once I was ready, I shifted my attention to her, positioning myself where I had better access, and called out, "Eat me," but I decided not to go along with her request, thinking, yeah, right, I'm not going there tonight. Instead, I continued with my original plan, making sure to take control of the situation. The intensity of the moment increased, and while Ann seemed to be enjoying it, I was more focused on releasing some of the frustration I had built up. This wasn't about romance, it felt more like me getting even. After a while, I decided to switch things up, introducing an element that I wasn't expecting. She reacted with surprise, not having experienced this before in our years together. "What are you doing?" she asked, clearly startled. "Just relax, it's fine," I replied, continuing with what I had started. I made sure to keep things under control, taking my time and alternating between approaches. Ann's reactions told me she was slowly getting used to it, even starting to enjoy it more as the moment progressed. Eventually, as things reached their peak, I pulled away and wrapped things up in a way that felt right for both of us. Afterward, we both lay there catching our breath, and reminded me to remove the cuffs, saying, "You need to take these cuffs off my wrists, they're digging into my skin. Give me a minute, I have to remember where I put the key." "Hopefully I didn't lose it," I smirked. "You're such a jerk, you better not lose it," she shot back. I retrieved the key, unlocked the cuffs, and tossed them onto the dresser. "What's gotten into you tonight?" she asked. "I just thought you might like it if I spiced things up a little in our love life." "You enjoyed it, didn't you?" I replied with a hint of sarcasm. "I never imagined you being so, how do I put it, kinky. You've always been pretty straightforward in bed," she said, almost cautiously. Well, and you never really gave me the chance to experiment in bed. With that, I got up and headed to the bathroom to wash up. After that night, and became much more attentive, and more than 2 weeks passed since her last meeting. I even thought that maybe she had ditched her lover and that we still had a chance. But my hopes were crushed when she soon announced that she needed to attend another meeting. She claimed it was necessary to finalize school reports before Thanksgiving. I didn't care whether this was a real meeting or not. It brought back all the anger that had been building up inside me. I was done with her, at least as my wife. The next day, I went to work and checked my schedule for the rest of the year. Nothing urgent was coming up, meaning I could take my remaining 2 weeks of vacation and take the kids far away after everything hit the fan. I had already arranged with a moving service that, on my call, they would pack up Anne's things and deliver them to her parents' house. This would be on the day everything fell apart. All that was left was to deal with Nick. Nick, as it turned out, had been married for about 6 years and had a young daughter. His wife, Sue, worked as a secretary at a small law firm in town. While I wanted to get back at Nick, I didn't want to drag his wife and daughter into it. However, after thinking it over, I realized that if someone were cheating on me, I would want to know. The next day during lunch, I decided to talk to Sue. I explained that my wife was a teacher at the same school where her husband worked, and that I needed to talk to her about something important in private. It would be better if we discussed it outside of her office, somewhere quiet, without any prying ears. Sue agreed. We grabbed a couple of sandwiches, some sodas, and sat in the back seat of my SUV. I started by telling her that this was the last thing I wanted to be doing, but there were a few things about Nick that I thought she needed to know. What are you talking about? Is something wrong with Nick? Sue asked, clearly alarmed. All I could say was, see for yourself, Sue. Watch this. I inserted the DVD into a portable player. There was no build-up, just straight into the action. The video started with my wife kneeling in front of Nick. Then the scene changed as they changed positions to satisfy each other. The clarity of the sound and video was perfect, leaving nothing to the imagination. Sue just stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, as I stopped the video about 10 minutes in. I was surprised that she wasn't crying, yelling, or anything like that. For a moment, I was genuinely concerned for her. Finally, in an almost eerily calm voice, she asked, "Is this my copy?" I told her it was one of 3 copies I had made. Sue explained that she had never suspected anything like this. What shocked me the most was her admission that while Nick and my wife were having sex downstairs, their daughter, whom Nick was supposed to be watching, was asleep upstairs. I asked what she planned to do next, but all she said was, "He'll pay. Oh God, he'll pay. He'll regret the day he ever met me." I decided to tell her what I had planned for Anne. After hearing it, she smirked and said, "That's cruel, but I like it." I apologized for being the one to deliver such devastating news, but I knew she'd want to know the truth. We exchanged phone numbers. Sue thanked me and went back to her office. All I could think was that poor guy would never see what was coming. The day before Thanksgiving, I told Anne that my parents had asked if the kids could visit them, since they knew we were planning to spend the holiday with her family, and responded, "That's fine. In that case, I'll have you all to myself." I just smiled. Thanksgiving at Anne's parents' house was quite the event. The whole family gathered, and the house was filled with people either cooking or watching the big game on her father's new high-definition TV. I limited myself to just 2 glasses of wine, as I wanted to keep a clear head for what was about to happen. I had planned my exit for right after dessert and coffee. Finally, dinner was over. While everyone was relaxing, I announced that I had a home video I wanted to share with everyone. My soon-to-be ex-wife looked at me with a shocked expression. I explained that it was a sweet home video I had made as a surprise for my beloved. Now start next story. Welcome to the cheating channel. It was a rather eerie garage. The Barack apartments were the first in the city to have their own parking lot on the lower level, but it wasn't nearly as well lit or maintained as the newer ones. There was no security, and I couldn't spot any cameras. It felt strange, since there were no restrictions on access either. All the parking spaces were assigned, and there were plenty of signs threatening violators with towing and associated fees. The location was in a low-traffic, non-commercial area, so I assumed they didn't have many problems. My mind started to wander. It was Friday evening, and I'd already been sitting there for 3 hours. My patience was wearing thin. My wife, Carlotta, was upstairs visiting Charles Henry Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, or C, as many called him, is the vice president of Gilbert Mechanicals, one of the largest companies in town. I wouldn't call him rich, but he's certainly well off. In fact, compared to me, he's wealthy. He's also charming, good-looking, and, I suspect, rather impressive in certain intimate aspects. So, it's probably easy for you to understand why I was here tonight. Carlotta and I had been married for 27 years. Back in high school, I was an average student and she was just another girl. I guess you could say we were a pair of unnoticed kids who slipped through the system. We started dating and got married the year after graduation. She wanted to move out of her parents' house, and I wanted a regular romantic relationship. At the time, it seemed like a fair deal. I got a job as a painter, and within a few years, I had my own business. We had 2 sons, Tony and Greg, and a daughter, Sharon. We never lacked anything, but raising 3 kids meant we never had extra money to spend on the nicer things in life. My kids were the only ones in the neighborhood who never made it to Disneyland. We spent a lot of time at Noble's Grove, but that didn't quite make up for it. Besides that, we could only afford family vacations at the bungalow on Little Lehigh. Carlotta and I always got along well. There was never that wild, passionate love like in the movies. We were comfortable together, but I can't say we were madly in love with each other. I thought that was just part of real life. After having the kids, Carlotta kept her figure almost entirely, though her hips became slightly wider. She had olive skin and thick dark hair. When she turned 40, a streak of gray appeared on the left side of her hair. It was strange, but a bit stylish. She usually styled her hair to frame her face. I had to admit she was still a beautiful woman. However, her beauty was balanced by her sharp temper. She could never be described as a warm person, and even the kids noticed this. As she got older, Carlotta became increasingly bitter. It was never directed at anyone in particular, just at everything and everyone in general. I had no idea what caused it. Tony and Greg graduated from school with achievements just as remarkable as mine. Ha ha ha. Well, not all of us can be geniuses. They both started working as apprentices for bricklayers, and within 2 years, they had their own small business. Not too shabby. Sharon got married and moved out as soon as she could. Once Carlotta and I were alone in the house, I became the target of her bitterness. I didn't eat well. I dressed like a slob. I wasn't in shape. I was stuck in a dead-end job and would never amount to anything. I made her drive a lousy car. We had no retirement plan. It was endless. I was sorry the kids had left because there was no one left to share Carlotta's anger with. Then, about a year later, it all stopped. My lovely wife, somehow, found a new interest that changed her attitude. Instead of constantly nagging me, she now simply ignored me. Oh, we still lived together as husband and wife, including maintaining physical intimacy, though it had become almost platonic. She continued cooking and keeping the house spotless, but the sarcasm disappeared. In bed, she acted the same as always, indifferent and unremarkable. I can't say it was a bad change, but it made me a little uneasy. I guess I should have been happy, but I wasn't. Of course, Carlotta's new interest was C. Jenkins. I had no idea where she met him or under what circumstances. All I knew was that they had a steady and serious relationship. All she had to do was ask, and I would have given her a divorce in an instant. She would have gotten half of everything, which wasn't that much. I patiently waited for her to bring it up or surprise me with the papers, but nothing ever happened. I assumed she was content with the way things were. I had no intention of bringing up the topic or arguing with her about it. Everything was going smoothly as long as she felt guilty about the affair. If I revealed that I knew what was happening, she would probably continue seeing him and start making my life miserable again. I couldn't take that risk. If she found out that I knew about C and kept seeing him, the humiliation would be unbearable, and I might have ended up doing something drastic. Then my children would have hated me, and I didn't want that to happen. It was a hell of a dilemma, Carlotta came into the garage alone. She got into her precious Civic and drove off without noticing my pickup truck parked in the corner. She needed to go home to prepare dinner. C usually ate out. I moved my pickup closer to his Lexus and settled in as comfortably as I could. I knew very little about my wife's lover. He was around 40, and as I mentioned, he was quite handsome. His photo occasionally appeared in the papers when he attended public events. Of course, Carlotta was never with him. One of his distinguishing features was a large ring on the pinky of his right hand. A big diamond about 3 carats. Rumor had it that he received a big bonus when he became vice president, and he spent it all on that ring. After about 5 years of marriage, I had overextended myself and bought Carlotta a ring that didn't even have half a carat. I was a fool, but I was proud of what I had done. I watched as he came out of the building and headed toward his Lexus. He even walked like he thought he was something special. I didn't know this guy, but I hated him. Just as he unlocked his car remotely, I got out of my truck. The stun gun hit him before he could reach the door. I wasn't particularly smooth or cold-blooded, but I handled the job well. I grabbed both of his legs and dragged him toward the back of my truck. At first, his head and shoulders lifted, and then I twisted his legs around. In movies, this always looks so easy, but getting over 100 kilos of limp body into the bed of a truck isn't that simple. First, I taped his legs and arms with duct tape. When I got to his mouth, I wrapped the tape around his head several times, making sure not to cover his nose. I didn't want the guy suffocating in the back of my truck. Then, I covered him with a tarp and secured the bed cover. Before leaving, I took his keys and locked the Lexus again. 20 minutes later, I called Carlotta and told her I was trying to finish some work in Trexlertown and would likely be home late. She sounded a bit disappointed but quickly moved on. It was already dusk when I arrived at the bungalow. I had already chosen and prepared a good spot on the south side. 2 apple trees grew there, and we always talked about planting another one. A container with the new golden delicious tree I bought yesterday was sitting next to a large hole. The hole was round. I wasn't about to dig one shaped like a grave. Occasionally, I could hear a car passing by, but the bungalow was hidden from view by the thick undergrowth. He woke up when I pulled the tarp off him. I couldn't tell if he was scared or angry. "Hi, do you know who I am?" His eyes were wide with fear as he nodded. "Yes." "Do you know why you're here?" His eyes darted around frantically, and he shook his head. I smiled, grabbed him by the legs, and dragged him out of the vehicle. As I pulled him out, the back of his head hit the edge of the door. He thrashed around as if he knew what was coming, but all he was doing was tiring himself out. I took off his watch and the expensive ring from his pinky, then put them in my pocket. His wallet and cell phone were already on the front seat of the truck. By the time I started pushing him into the hole, I could tell he was terrified. He kept trying to stand up even though his hands and feet were tied. Eventually, I had to hit him on the head with the shovel to get him to calm down. It didn't knock him out, but it made him easier to handle. I began filling in the hole after placing him in a fetal position. He was still alive, and before I finished burying him, he regained consciousness. By then, all he could do was make faint grunting sounds. With nearly a meter of dirt on top of him, there was no way to escape, and finally, everything went silent. I took the new apple tree out of its pot, carefully placed it in the center of the hole, and filled it with a couple of bags of good soil for seedlings. I used the remaining dirt from the hole to finish the job, then neatly spread 2 bags of mulch on top. It was time to head home. My dinner had just been taken out of the microwave. My wife hadn't moved from the TV. The evening was quiet. I carefully hid everything I had taken from C in the garage, planning to get rid of it later. Carlotta went to bed early, and I spent the night on the couch. The weekend was busy. I had to rake leaves and trim the bushes. At least I didn't have to mow the lawn anymore. There was a good chance that no one would visit the bungalow for the next few months. Carlotta hadn't been there in years. This would give the new tree time to take root and not look like it had just been planted. The weekend passed quietly and uneventfully. On Sunday evening, I drove to Reading and got rid of the watch, wallet, and cell phone I had taken from C. Monday morning arrived, and I was ready to start a new week. Carlotta seemed anxious. I noticed her trying to call a number on her cell phone several times, but without success. Everything was fine until Wednesday, when the police showed up at my workplace and took me to the station. "Mr. Saunders, do you have any idea why you're here?" The name tag on his chest read, Lieutenant Detective Williams. "The only thing I can think of is that someone didn't like how I painted their house," I said with a smirk of irritation. "Do you know Charles Henry Jenkins?" "I know who he is, but I've never met the man." "Why are you asking?" "Mr. Jenkins is a close friend of your wife, Carlotta." "Then maybe you should talk to my wife?" "What does this have to do with me? Did he accuse me of something?" "Mr. Jenkins hasn't said anything." Detective Williams shuffled through some papers on the desk. "Mr. Jenkins didn't show up for work on Monday, and he was last seen on Friday." "I don't know what to tell you. Have you spoken to the last person who saw him?" "We've been in touch, Mr. Saunders. That person was your wife." "I'm just a little curious. What kind of relationship does my wife have with this guy, Jenkins? And since he's her friend, why am I the one sitting here?" Detective Williams stood up from his chair. "Excuse me for a moment." I watched as he left the room and turned toward the wall with a large one-way mirror. A minute later, he returned to his seat. "Mr. Saunders, your wife has been close to Mr. Jenkins for about 6 months. She was a regular visitor at his apartment, and even kept clothes and personal items there." "Are you saying my wife's having an affair with this guy, Jenkins? Would you like some coffee, Mr. Saunders? Or maybe a Coke?" "No, damn it. But I'd like to know where this guy, Jenkins, is so I can pay him a visit. At the very least, tell me where he lives." From that moment, the conversation started to go downhill. The house I had been painting in Trexlertown was empty. No one could confirm whether I had been there or not. In fact, I had painted it the day before. All they had was my phone call to Carlotta, which didn't prove anything. I spent the rest of the weekend keeping an eye on my wife. I even made sure I was with people on Monday and Tuesday, just in case. After 2 hours, Detective Williams and his colleagues seemed disappointed and told me I could go. I told them that, under the circumstances, they should convince my wife to stay somewhere else until I had a chance to calm down. They left me sitting in the room for another hour, and eventually, a patrol officer came in to inform me that Carlotta would be staying with Sharon for a few days. I spent the evening sipping beer and smirking to myself. The next morning, I moved all my things into one of the spare bedrooms. I wasn't going to sleep with Carlotta anymore. The following evening, Tony, Greg, and Sharon came over to talk to me. Their mother had confessed to the affair and expressed deep regret. She said it was a mistake and that she never meant to hurt me. It would never happen again. I listened to that nonsense for 30 minutes, trying to be as polite as possible. Once I agreed to let her come back home, everyone was happy and smiling. After they left, I had a few more beers and started smiling again. Carlotta returned home the next morning, and my sense of euphoria didn't last long. We never spoke about her affair with C. In fact, we barely talked at all. Our conversations were limited to the bare minimum required to function. I never accused her of anything, and she never offered any explanations or apologies. The police never contacted me again. A few small articles appeared in the local newspapers, and then everything went quiet. However, things with Carlotta didn't turn out the way I had hoped. She didn't feel any remorse, and soon, her old anger and bitterness began to resurface. She had lost her lover and finally realized he wasn't coming back. I got up early in the mornings and usually had breakfast, lunch, and dinner at one of the local diners. By the time I returned home in the evenings, I was always ready to shower and go to bed. Carlotta took care of the house and did my laundry. I never asked for more. We still shared bank accounts and credit cards, but she never abused them. There was no intimacy between us. The few times we were in the same room were tense. All the old arguments, hints, and insults came back. I found myself hoping she would find a new lover and regretting the end of her first affair. Even though she wasn't cheating on me anymore, she treated me like a fool. She knew that I was aware of her affair and had done nothing about it. What kind of man finds out his wife is unfaithful and then just gives in and accepts it? A weak man. I could see the contempt in her eyes every time she looked at me. To her, I was nobody. Little did she know I was the one pulling the strings. I was the one in control. It was time to throw her off balance. All the kids planned to celebrate Thanksgiving at our house. I thought it was a great idea. It would give me the chance to set things straight. The kids had noticed that Carlotta had gone back to her old, nasty ways, but they didn't know what to do about it. I think they assumed it was my fault. Tony and Greg's wives, Sharon and Carlotta, were busy in the kitchen while the men watched football. I never cared much for sports, but today was a special day. I was pleased when Sharon announced that dinner was ready. There were 8 of us at the table. Normally, someone would say a prayer before the meal. This time, we decided to go around the table, with each person saying what they were thankful for. It's a silly ritual that feels like something a family from a TV sitcom would do. I didn't mind, though, because it gave me the chance to unsettle my wife a little. Most of the speeches were pretty much what you'd expect. Sharon took the opportunity to announce that she was pregnant, something we all kind of knew already. When it was my turn, I smiled and raised my right hand. Everyone got a good look at the shiny diamond ring on my pinky. I'm thankful for this magical ring, given to me by my beloved wife. It gave me the strength to set things right. It replaced my sadness with happiness. It rid me of humiliation and gave me pride. It gave me the courage to correct a terrible mistake. I'm truly grateful for my wonderful, magical ring. The table fell silent. Carlotta sat frozen, her eyes and mouth wide open. The rest of the family didn't notice anything unusual because they were all staring at me and my ring, trying to figure out what in the world I was talking about. It's a really nice ring, Dad. But what's up with that strange speech? Tony asked, breaking the silence, and soon everyone joined in, asking for an explanation. I just smiled and lowered my hand back to my lap. I looked at Greg, sitting to my right, and said, "Your turn." No one noticed when Carlotta quietly stood up and left the room. Everyone else, except her, had finished their turn giving thanks. Someone briefly commented on her absence, but then everyone started serving themselves. When I got up to look for my wife, everyone was too busy to notice. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, quietly crying. She looked at me with an expression that seemed to be a mix of fear and anxiety. Her eyes were swollen and her cheeks were red. She didn't say anything, just sat there, staring sadly. "Carlotta, your family is waiting for you to join them. Freshen up and come back to the table." That was it. I closed the bedroom door and returned to our guests. 5 minutes later, my wife rejoined us, and no one mentioned her brief absence. The rest of the evening went as expected. I insisted that the kids take all the leftover food home with them. The girls helped Carlotta clean up, and everything was tidied away. The only thing the guys did was down a few bottles of beer and belch. I waved goodbye to the last of them and noticed my wife heading to the bedroom. I watched her go, a slight smile on my face, which was really more of a smirk. I felt so wickedly satisfied and redeemed. I had another beer before heading to my room. The next morning, I was unexpectedly greeted by the smell of fresh coffee in the kitchen. Carlotta was fully dressed and ready for the day. She offered me a cup of freshly brewed coffee, which I accepted and politely drank before heading to work. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. The contempt in her eyes was gone, replaced by a look of cautious respect. It was more of a tolerating gaze, but it still made me feel a bit uneasy. Work was tough that day. I figured I had a day, maybe 2, before the police came for me. Now that Carlotta had some inkling that I was involved in her boyfriend's disappearance, she wouldn't give up. I didn't care. I wasn't going to put up with her antics anymore. I wouldn't be able to give the authorities a plausible explanation about the ring. The following morning, Carlotta made coffee again and asked if I wanted some eggs or anything else. I took an English muffin with a bit of honey. Was this my last meal? Were the cops going to show up today? We didn't talk, but there were no unpleasant remarks either. The next week began the same way. On Tuesday morning, I had French toast. On Wednesday morning, she asked if I could come home early because she was planning to make lasagna, my favorite dish. Now I was genuinely scared. There were 2 weeks left until Christmas. I felt increasingly uncomfortable. Carlotta was planning something, and I had no idea what it was, but I knew I wasn't going to like it. When I was a kid, I hated devil's food cake. Everyone else in the family loved it, so my mom made it often. My favorite cake frosting was lemon cream. In an attempt to appease me, my mom started putting lemon frosting on the devil's food cake. I remember happily eating the sweet treat, but I always knew that beneath its flavor was that darn devilish cake. Carlotta was the cake, and her behavior was the lemon frosting. Sooner or later, the frosting would run out, and I'd be left with the devil's food cake. By that point, I had decided she wasn't going to the police or telling them about the ring. She had other plans which likely weren't legal. I couldn't wait any longer. 2 days before Christmas, I closed the bank accounts and canceled the credit cards. There wasn't much money, but I decided I'd take it all. That's right, I was leaving. No divorce, no legal nonsense. I was just going to walk away. The house was a rental. We had never really been interested in buying our own place. We set up a small tree with gifts for each of the kids and their spouses. They were supposed to come over later in the afternoon. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be seeing them this year. Early Christmas morning, I placed a small jewelry box under the tree for Carlotta and quietly left the house for the last time. I drove west until I hit I-81, then headed south. I had a friend in Pensacola who was going to let me stay with him until I found my own place. I stopped for breakfast near Hagerstown. By now, Carlotta was probably opening her gift. Inside, she would find my wedding ring and the 3-carat diamond ring. It was too far to drive in one day, at least for me. Unfortunately, most motels were booked for the holidays. I finally found one near Chattanooga. The next day, I settled in comfortably with my old friend Tom and his wife. In the area, there were plenty of furnished mobile homes available for rent. Once I got settled, I found work at a company that specialized in flood and water damage restoration. They agreed to pay me under the table as long as I didn't give them my social security number. It was an interesting arrangement, and everyone was happy. I decided it was time to reach out to my kids. I didn't care about Carlotta, but the kids needed some peace of mind. One of my coworkers was happy to let me use his cell phone in exchange for buying him lunch. "Tony, it's Dad. What's going on? Where the hell have you been? It's a mess over here. Mom's losing it." "Losing it how? Is she crazy angry or crazy sad?" "Crazy angry." Christmas was a total disaster, but it got even worse afterward. When she found out you took all the money and canceled the credit cards, she went ballistic. Well, at least something good came out of it. What happened? Before Christmas, everything seemed fine with you two. We all thought you'd figure it out. "Tony, it might have looked that way, but trust me, it was never going to happen. I decided it was better to leave before everything fell apart. We're not sure how long she'll manage with the money. None of us are in a position to help." Sharon suggested she get a job, and Mom exploded. "I don't think she has enough to cover rent and utilities by the end of the month. Are you guys doing anything for her at all?" "We're doing our best to stay away from her. Since she doesn't have you to blame, she's taking it out on us. Sharon doesn't even answer her calls anymore. Even if we could help, it's reached the point where none of us want to. Well, I'm sorry to leave you guys to deal with this mess, but you all insisted I take her back after she cheated on me, so now you'll have to live with it. Are you sure you don't want to come home?" "Not a chance. I've got a job and a good place. Next week, I'm buying a high-definition TV and a couple of packs of beer. I'm doing just fine." "Where the hell are you? The phone says you're in El Paso." "That's not my phone. Don't try calling me back on this number. It won't work. I'll give you a call again in a couple of weeks. Say hi to Greg and Sharon for me." I was glad things were going okay at home. The kids were having a rough time, but they were managing. My only problem now was deciding which TV to buy, a 32-inch or a 37-inch. Decisions. There was plenty of work for painters in the area. All the contractors had licenses, but it seemed like no one really cared about the workers. It was easier to look the other way. As long as the job got done and there were no complaints, everything was fine. I bought a TV and a small microwave. I was over the moon. I was making enough money to live on, so I didn't need to touch the cash I'd brought with me. I bought a disposable cell phone and called Tony 3 weeks later. "Dad, I'm glad you called. Mom's in jail." "What the hell is your mother in jail for? Remember that ring you were showing off at Thanksgiving?" Yeah, what about it? You said you got it from Mom, right? That's true. Why are you asking? Well, Mom needed some cash and tried to pawn it. She got arrested at the pawn shop within 10 minutes. Damn, that's harsh. Why did they arrest her? You know why, don't you? I didn't answer, but I think he heard me chuckle. Mom told the police that you gave her the ring, but they didn't believe her. It would have been tough for the police to pin anything on Carlotta just because of the ring. They didn't have a body, a murder weapon, a motive, or any witnesses. What could they possibly charge her with? Making phone calls to her boyfriend? Tony, I'll call you back in a week. I don't know what to do right now. Let me think about it. I spent a few hours on the computers at the public library. The Reading Eagle had a few articles covering the investigation into Charles Henry Jenkins' disappearance. The biggest break they got was when Carlotta tried to pawn his ring. She claimed I had given it to her and then I disappeared. When I called Tony next, he told me that he had reassured the authorities I was fine, just trying to get away from Carlotta. They spent a few days with my wife and said they understood why I left, but they still wanted to talk to me. Tony gave me a number I could call. Later that same week, I went to Biloxi and called the Reading Police Department. It wasn't the conversation they were hoping for, but they seemed satisfied with my answers. I simply told them that after finding out my wife had cheated on me, I felt I couldn't live with her anymore. Leaving was the only way I could maintain any sense of self-respect. I think they just needed to fill in a few gaps in their investigation report. Before heading home, I called Sharon. Most of my calls had been to Tony since he was the oldest and, in my opinion, the most level-headed. She was happy to hear from me and immediately asked me to call Greg later that evening. The police didn't have enough evidence to charge Carlotta, so they let her go. Sharon said Carlotta packed her things into her car and went to stay with her sister in Frackville. Carlotta refused to speak to the kids anymore and told them to go to hell. We spent Easter break together at Disneyland. Everyone except Carlotta. Sharon was 5 months pregnant, but she still had a great time. I had denied my kids the chance to go when they were younger, but now it seemed like they were all enjoying it. The money I had earned was spent on plane tickets and admission, but it was worth it. I had lost my wife, but I still had my family. Someday, I'll have to go back to the family bungalow and check on the golden delicious apple tree. Someday. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of Cheating Secrets. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye. Now start next story. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. It started as a whisper in my mind, an inkling that something was off. Claire and I had been together for 12 years of shared dreams, Sunday morning coffee runs, and the sort of silent understanding that only long-term couples have. We'd had our challenges, our share of late-night arguments and stressed-out dinners, but nothing prepared me for the months leading up to the day I discovered the truth. Claire's behavior had shifted slowly, in ways that were almost imperceptible at first. She seemed restless, easily annoyed over small things that would usually roll off her shoulders. There were more late nights at work, sudden errands, and plans with friends I had never heard of. I chalked it up to her job, a marketing role with long hours and occasional last-minute events. We'd been through tough work schedules before, but this was different. Every time I asked about her day, her responses grew shorter, and she was quick to change the topic, turning questions back on me as if deflecting would shield her from the scrutiny. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon. We were supposed to meet my parents for lunch, but at the last minute, Claire told me she wasn't feeling well. She insisted I go alone, so I left, reluctantly. But halfway through the drive, something nagged at me, a voice that whispered, "Go back." Instead of heading to lunch, I turned the car around and drove home. I was almost embarrassed by my suspicion, telling myself that my imagination was just running wild. But when I opened the front door and heard the faint, hurried sound of her voice through the kitchen window, I froze. Claire was talking to someone on her phone in a hadn't heard her use with me in years. Soft, a little breathy. I crept closer, feeling ridiculous and guilty, but there was no denying what I was hearing. She was laughing softly, words spilling out in a way that was distinctly flirtatious, intimate. I didn't need to know the exact words to understand what they meant. When she ended the call, I quickly retreated, pulling the door shut as if I just stepped in. She barely glanced at me when I came in, just offered a weak smile and mumbled something about feeling better. I wanted to confront her then and there, to demand an explanation, but a strange calm settled over me. I realized that whatever was happening was bigger than just a single suspicious call, bigger than the slight irritation in her voice when I asked about her day. That was when I knew I couldn't let her know I was on to her. Not yet. The next few days were excruciating. I kept replaying that moment, my mind spinning with possibilities, with memories that now felt tainted. But the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to confirm the truth before confronting her. This was about more than catching her in a lie. I needed to understand how far it had gone, what else she had hidden from me. It was a week later, while she was taking a shower, that I finally got my chance. Her phone was lying on the nightstand, unguarded. I picked it up, hands shaking, knowing this might be my only opportunity. My fingers felt clumsy, but the lock screen gave way, and suddenly, I was inside her world, a world I thought I knew. My heart raced as I scrolled through her messages. There it was, a conversation with someone saved as Alicia's work. But as I scanned the messages, the truth was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a colleague or an old friend. It was a man, someone she had been confiding in, someone she had been meeting. The texts were careful, cryptic, but there was no mistaking the connection, the affection in her words. She had lied to me with every single message she'd sent him. I felt a fury rise within me, the kind that fills you with ice-cold clarity rather than hot anger. But I didn't throw her phone down. I didn't even let her see the anger on my face when she came out of the shower, casually asking if I wanted to order takeout. Instead, I buried it, swallowing my rage like a bitter pill. Over the next few days, I sank into my plan, thinking of every detail, every move, because I knew a simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. She had played me like a fool, kept me in the dark while she snuck around behind my back, and I would make her regret every last moment of it. My first step was gathering more information about the man she'd been seeing. It didn't take long to track him down: social media, work profiles, and a few carefully worded questions to a mutual friend of Claire's. His name was Jake. He was smooth, the sort of guy who wore confidence like cologne. In pictures, he always seemed to have a casual smile, the kind that felt like an invitation. I hated him on sight. This was the man she'd risked everything for, the man she'd prioritized over the life we had built together. But the more I learned about him, the more I realized he would be instrumental in my plan. The next stage required patience. I had to resist every impulse to lash out, every instinct to confront her. Instead, I set things in motion subtly, acting as if everything were normal, even going so far as to plan a surprise birthday dinner for her. I hinted at it, dropping little details that made her believe it was just the two of us. Each time she looked at me with that oblivious smile, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. When the night of her birthday arrived, I played my role to perfection. I led her to the restaurant, arm around her shoulders, our friends and family all waiting inside with nervous smiles. She was surprised, delighted, her face lighting up in a way that felt almost genuine. But I kept my gaze steady, watching every reaction, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. The final blow was her affair partner, Jake, strolling through the door, just as planned. The surprise flickered in her eyes, the dawning horror as she connected the dots, realizing the impossible trap she had walked into. I watched her squirm, saw the panicked glances she threw in his direction, the way she tried to mask her shock with a thin, unsteady smile. Her friends and family, all watching, were silent, their confusion slowly giving way to an understanding that something was terribly wrong. I waited until the room was filled with a thick silence, the weight of her lies pressing down on every person gathered around us. And then I stood, raising my glass with a hollow smile, ready to deliver the toast that would reveal her betrayal in one brutal sentence. I raised my glass, forcing a smile, feeling the tension radiate from Claire. Her eyes darted from mine to Jake's and back again, and her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her wine glass. Every instinct told me to tear her down, to expose her secrets in a way that would make her feel the humiliation and betrayal she had inflicted on me. But I kept my expression controlled, steady. To my beautiful wife, Claire, I said, my voice calm, almost cheerful, thank you for teaching me the meaning of trust and love, and showing me exactly how much trust can be broken by someone you thought you knew. I let the silence settle as the words sank in. Her cheeks flushed crimson, and I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she clenched her glass. There were confused murmurs around the table. Friends and family exchanged uncertain glances, their smiles faltering. Claire opened her mouth to speak, to somehow explain herself, but she was at a loss, caught between her shame and the sudden exposure. Jake, standing a few feet away, had frozen in place, clearly realizing he'd just walked into a trap. The confusion of our guests turned into a wave of realization, whispers circulating as people pieced together the truth. Her sister, Ellen, stared at her, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. My mother, seated across from us, wore a look of stunned hurt, as if she had been blindsided by the betrayal just as much as I had. It was hard to know which one of us she was more furious with, her, for the infidelity, or me, for turning the occasion into an expose. Claire finally managed to stammer, "Wait, please, this isn't what it looks like." Her voice was pleading, her eyes watery with desperation as she glanced around the table, seeking a sympathetic face, someone who would take her side. "Isn't it, though?" I replied, keeping my tone level, knowing that if I raised my voice or lost control, she'd try to use it against me later. "Claire, why don't you explain to everyone here what it is?" Then, the room was silent, the kind of silence that feels deafening. Claire's gaze shifted helplessly, finally settling on Jake. I could see her willing him to save her, to somehow explain away their relationship in a way that would salvage her image, her pride. But Jake stood rooted in place, unable to meet her eyes, his face drained of color. This wasn't his moment of glory, it was his downfall as much as hers. Jake took a step back, and then another, his hand rubbing the back of his neck in a futile attempt to avoid the inevitable. I think maybe I should go," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The cowardice in his retreat was almost satisfying. He'd had no problem being bold and secret, but faced with the reality, he was quick to crumble. Claire watched him, her face crumpling as he slipped out the door, abandoning her to the mess they had both created. The betrayal from her affair partner hit her hard. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped, the desperate look that flashed across her face as he disappeared into the night. She turned back to me, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Please, can we talk? Alone." I raised an eyebrow, unfeeling and unmoved. "Talk? Now? Isn't it a little late for that, Claire?" I gestured to the people around us. "Why don't you tell everyone here the story you've been hiding, the one you thought you could keep in the dark?" Claire's shoulders dropped as she slowly sank back into her seat, visibly deflated. She seemed lost, small, her usually composed facade shattered under the weight of her own lies. She looked around the table, avoiding each pair of eyes that met hers, her breathing shallow. Her sister, Ellen, finally spoke up. "Claire, is it true?" Her voice was tight, holding back anger. Have you been cheating on him?" The shame in Claire's face was answer enough, but she still tried to defend herself, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her words weak and empty. I felt alone. You thought it was okay to lie, to throw away everything we built." My voice cut through her excuses like a knife. "How many nights did you sit across from me, lying to my face, sneaking around while I thought we were in this together?" Claire's lip trembled, and she wiped at her eyes, her makeup beginning to smear as the tears fell faster. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. "You made it happen. Every single time you met him, you chose this. Don't pretend this was some accident." The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Claire had lost the support of everyone in that room, her deceit laid bare for all to see. She glanced around at the faces of our family and friends, and I could see the dawning horror in her eyes, the realization that she was now utterly alone in her disgrace. I thought we were partners. I continued, my voice softer but no less cutting. I thought I knew the woman I'd married. But clearly I was wrong. I set my glass down and pushed my chair back, standing up slowly. Claire, you have no idea what you've lost. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The physical distance between us felt right, mirroring the emotional chasm her actions had created. Please, just give me a chance to make this right, she pleaded, her words dripping with desperation. I can fix this, I can. Fix it. I shook my head, barely able to hold back my contempt. There's no fixing this, Claire. The trust is gone. It's over. I looked her in the eye, wanting her to feel the finality of my words. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her behind, broken and exposed. I could hear the murmurs of disbelief, the whispered questions and shocked exclamations as I moved through the restaurant. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd left behind. A woman who had gambled everything and lost. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a bomb, calming the storm that had been brewing inside me for weeks. I took a deep breath, finally free from the weight of her lies. It was done. There was no going back. Claire's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it hadn't shattered me. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. The days after the dinner felt surreal, like I'd been dropped into a new reality. Claire's things were still in the house. Her perfume lingered in our bedroom, and her favorite mug sat in the cabinet, untouched. But to me, they felt like remnants of someone I didn't know anymore. I had spent years building my life around her, and in one night, that life had crumbled. Claire called me incessantly after the dinner. I ignored most of her messages and let the phone ring unanswered when she tried calling. A part of me wanted to hear her explanation, to know if she could offer any semblance of a reason. But I was exhausted by her lies, and a bitter voice inside me told me that whatever she had to say would only make things worse. For now, silence felt like my best weapon. It was late on the third night when I finally gave in, picking up her call out of sheer frustration. Why do you keep calling, Claire? My voice came out colder than I intended, but I didn't care. She didn't deserve warmth. There was a pause, and when she spoke, her voice was a mix of desperation and remorse. I need to explain. I need you to understand what happened. Please let me come over. Let's talk face to face. Face to face. I almost laughed. You want to sit across from me and pretend this is something we can talk through? Like a misunderstanding? It's not like that, she cried, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. Please just let me explain. Fine, I said, tired of her insistence. Come by tomorrow evening. But don't expect this to end the way you want it to. The next evening, she arrived right on time, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She wore the same floral dress I remembered from one of our anniversary dinners, and she looked as though she'd barely slept. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, and the usual spark of confidence that used to draw people to her had dimmed. It would have evoked some sympathy in me once, but now it only felt hollow. She stepped into the living room, glancing around as if it was unfamiliar territory, and I motioned for her to sit on the couch. I took the armchair opposite, crossing my arms, waiting for her to speak. After a moment, she let out a shaky breath, clasping her hands together as if steadying herself. I'm sorry, she began, her voice thick with emotion. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. My voice was cold, each word sharp. You hurt me every time you saw him, every time you lied. Don't stand here and pretend it wasn't a choice you made. Her hands twisted in her lap, and she swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. It wasn't supposed to happen, Tom. I didn't plan this. They spiraled. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. Explain, then. Tell me what I'm missing that would somehow justify everything you did. She closed her eyes briefly, a tear slipping down her cheek. It's not that simple. I was lonely. You've been so busy, always working, and I felt invisible. It felt like we were just going through the motions, and I needed to feel something again. My anger flared, and I gripped the armrest of the chair. So you found someone else. That was your solution. It wasn't like that at first, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was just looking for something to fill the emptiness. I didn't think it would go this far, that it would mean so much. Mean so much, I repeated bitterly. It meant more than what we had. The life we built together. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not like that. I love you, Tom. I swear I love you. I was confused. You were confused, so you lied to me for months. How many times did you tell yourself it was fine, that I wouldn't find out? I watched her squirm under my gaze, and for the first time, she seemed to fully comprehend the depth of the betrayal. This isn't something you can just excuse away, Claire. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she began to cry. I know I messed up. I don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't end us like this. Let me try to make it right. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was overshadowed by a sense of justice. You want me to forgive you, to move on as if this was just a bump in the road? I don't know how you can ask that. She took a shaky breath, looking up at me, her eyes filled with hope. Because I know we're worth fighting for. We've been through so much, Tom. Please, let's try to fix this. Let me prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her plea settle over me like a heavy fog. You aren't the woman I fell in love with, Claire. That woman wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have destroyed us for a fling. She reached out a hand, desperation flashing across her face. Don't say that. Don't say it's over. I made a mistake, yes, but it doesn't mean we can't start over. I took a deep breath, finally letting the anger and hurt drain away, leaving only a cold sense of clarity. You're right, Claire. We can start over. But not together. She recoiled as if I'd struck her, her face crumpling as the reality of my words hit her. Tom, please don't do this. I didn't do this, Claire. You did. I stood up, looking down at her, a sense of finality settling over me. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me, who chose someone else over everything we had. I don't hate you, but I can't forgive you. Her face contorted with grief, and she clutched at her dress, her breathing coming in short, gasping sobs. Tom, I can't lose you. I know I don't deserve it, but please let me try. I shook my head, already feeling the resolve solidifying within me. I'm done, Claire. I've given you my love, my trust, and my time, and you threw it away. I took one last look at her, the woman who had once been everything to me, now a stranger drenched in regret. Goodbye, Claire. I turned, walking toward the door, leaving her sobbing in the living room. The sound of her cries echoed in my mind as I left, but I didn't look back. Each step felt lighter, each breath a little easier. I had mourned the relationship, mourned the betrayal. Now I was finally ready to let it go. The cool night air greeted me, filling my lungs as I took a deep breath. The street was quiet, the stars shining down like silent witnesses to the end of my marriage. For the first time since discovering her infidelity, I felt a strange peace settle over me. It wasn't the life I had planned, and I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew one thing with certainty: I was free. As I walked away from our house, from the life we had built, I knew it would be hard, that the nights would be long and the memories sharp. But there was no going back now. The man I had been with, Claire, was gone, and in his place I was finally ready to start over. Alone but whole. The first weeks after the split felt hollow. The initial surge of freedom that had carried me out the door faded into a strange emptiness, a silence that lingered long after I returned to my empty house. It was as if everything, every scent, every object, was frozen in time, stubbornly holding on to remnants of a life I was trying to forget. I told myself I'd adjust. Every day, I forced myself to move forward, throwing myself into work, going out with friends, even picking up new hobbies. I thought I could fill the gaps, rebuild a new version of my life where Claire was nothing but a memory. But the wound left by her betrayal ran deep, the sadness creeping in whenever I let my guard down, filling me with questions I couldn't answer. I didn't hear from her much after that final night, only a few messages, all unanswered. As far as I knew, she had left town and was trying to find a new start, just like me. It was a rainy Sunday night, about a month later, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring, assuming it was another spam call, but then a voicemail popped up. Curiosity got the better of me, and I played the message, half expecting to delete it right away. "Hi, Tom. This is Claire's sister, Ellen." Her voice cracked, and a pause stretched out. I could hear the faint sounds of her stifling a sob. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear right now, but there's no easy way to say this. Claire, she's gone. She took her own life last night." The world stopped. I replayed the message, trying to make sense of the words, trying to find some hidden meaning that would erase what she'd just said. But each time, the words landed harder, pressing down like a weight on my chest. Claire, gone. My hands shook as I put the phone down, staring at the wall, memories flooding in like a tide that refused to be held back. Every smile, every whispered promise, even the pain of our last moments together, they all mingled into a single, agonizing ache. She was gone, truly gone, and I was left alone with the pieces of a love that had shattered beyond repair. Ellen's message went on, her voice thick with sorrow as she told me the few details she knew. Claire had been struggling since the breakup, her guilt consuming her, and she had withdrawn from friends and family, refusing to see anyone. She left a note, Ellen said, though it was brief and mostly incoherent, just fragments of apology, regret, and words that hinted at the depth of her remorse. My name was mentioned once, a sentence where she expressed a hope that I'd find peace, a hope that sounded like a last plea for forgiveness. The days that followed were a blur. I went to her funeral, standing at the back of the room, keeping a distance from her family and friends. Some of them shot me looks, a mix of sympathy and reproach. Maybe they blamed me. Maybe they thought I should have taken her back, should have tried harder to forgive her. But I barely registered their gazes. I was locked in a whirlwind of my own guilt and confusion, feeling the weight of choices I couldn't undo. In the quiet of the funeral home, I replayed our last moments together, every word I'd spoken, every harsh sentence that now felt cruel in light of her absence. I had been so resolute, so sure that I was in the right, but now, standing in the shadow of her death, my certainty crumbled. What if I'd given her another chance? What if I had let her explain, tried to understand, even if I couldn't forgive? A voice in my head whispered that perhaps she could have healed, that maybe, just maybe, she could have found peace if I hadn't walked away so completely. Days passed in silence. I went back to work, back to a life that felt hollow, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Grief settled over me like a fog, thick and unyielding, coloring everything in shades of gray. I avoided friends, ignored calls from family, retreating further into myself, each night haunted by dreams of Claire's face, her voice, the memory of her smile that had once felt like home. One night, in a moment of weakness, I found myself scrolling through old photos, stopping at one from a summer vacation years ago. We were by the beach, laughing, her arm around my shoulders as we squinted into the sun. It was a perfect moment, a memory untouched by the pain that had followed. I could almost hear her laugh, feel the warmth of that day, and for a brief, aching second, I wanted nothing more than to reach back through time and pull her close. The guilt ate away at me, twisting my insides with questions that would never have answers. I began to visit her grave, always late at night, when the cemetery was empty. I'd sit there, under the dim light of the street lamp, talking to the air, trying to make sense of everything, whispering words I hadn't had the courage to say while she was alive. Claire, I murmured one night, my voice thick with the weight of regret. I don't know if I did the right thing. I thought I was strong, thought I could just move on. But now, I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. The wind rustled through the trees, a cold, empty sound, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I stayed there for hours, my heart heavy with things left unsaid, apologies that would never reach her, and a sorrow that I would carry alone. In the end, I went home, shutting the door on the life we'd shared, the love we'd broken. I had thought that walking away from her betrayal would give me peace, But now I knew the truth, that peace was a fragile thing, easily shattered, and that sometimes even the righteous find themselves lost in the ruins they leave behind. Now start next story. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. It had been an exhausting week at work, the kind where the clock's hands felt stuck, moving just to mock me with the persistence of tasks. Yet, despite the weariness, life had a certain comfort in predictability. I was Mark, the steady hand in our home, husband to Lucy, father to 2 energetic children, and the man who prided himself on being unshakable, reliable. I led the IT department at a mid-sized firm, ensuring that crises were managed with calm precision. Lucy worked in the same company as a customer ambassador, whatever that really entailed. She was well-loved, full of vibrant energy, with laughter that seemed to brighten the most mundane moments. It felt good to share our work environment, to have lunch together, even if only on rare days when the workload allowed. Our life had carved itself into a comfortable routine. Weekdays passed in a blur of school drop-offs, work commutes, dinners eaten amid children's chatter about school and friends, and the quiet moments when the house settled into sleep. Weekends were ours, filled with laughter, games in the backyard, and the warmth of shared breakfasts. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, filled with memories stitched into each day like the hand-sewn patches of an old quilt. But one afternoon, as we wrapped up a meeting, Jack Edwards, the company's CEO, approached Lucy and me with a grin. Jack was the type who didn't just lead with authority but infused his speech with the charm of an old-school movie star. He leaned in, his voice a blend of excitement and conspiratorial glee. "I've got something special planned," Jack said, his eyes sparkling as he focused on Lucy. "William Fellows, our top client, has invited a few of us for a long weekend on his private island. As a token of appreciation, really, and I'd love for you both to join. Mark, your expertise is essential, and Lucy, well, William insisted on your presence. He's quite taken with your professionalism. A weekend on a private island." It sounded absurdly extravagant. I glanced at Lucy, who was beaming, her eyes glistening with the excitement of something different, something thrilling. She had spoken of William before in passing, usually with a tone that seemed touched by fascination. He was wealthy, enigmatic, and carried himself with an air that made others fall silent when he walked into a room. According to Lucy, his power didn't just come from his money, but from the way he wielded it, a quiet command that turned heads and piqued curiosities. Lucy squeezed my arm, breaking my train of thought. "Can you believe it?" she whispered. "It'll be a chance to unwind, Mark. We need this." The prospect of clear blue waters and an escape from the mundane was tempting. Still, an odd tension curled around the idea of seeing Lucy's eagerness when William's name was mentioned. I pushed it aside. Maybe it was nothing. After all, when had I ever doubted her? The next few days were a whirl of preparations. Lucy threw herself into packing, selecting clothes that I hadn't seen in years, dresses that seemed designed for luxury, not practicality. She hummed while folding delicate fabrics, eyes dancing in a way that hinted at something beyond anticipation. "Do you think this is too much?" she asked, holding up a red satin dress, the kind that looked as if it belonged at a gala. It clung to her figure in a way that made me pause. "No," I said, a smile forcing itself to my lips. "You'll look beautiful." The kids were dropped off with their grandparents, who promised them a weekend of treats and games. It felt like we were setting off on a second honeymoon, a break from the familiar that should have promised closeness. But as we drove to the airport, a silence stretched between us, filled not with anticipation but an unnameable tension. The private jet was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just luxurious, it was designed to remind you that you didn't belong unless you were someone like William Fellows. Crystal glasses sparkled under the soft glow of cabin lights, and the leather seats were buttery smooth. Lucy settled in next to me, her hand resting lightly on my thigh, but her gaze swept the cabin, as if searching for someone. I studied her profile as the engines roared to life. She was beautiful, of course, tall, with blonde hair that caught the light and blue eyes that shone with a mix of joy and nerves. But there was a distance in her expression, something I hadn't noticed before. Or perhaps I had and chose to ignore it. We landed on the island to the sight of white sands and gentle waves lapping at the shore. A line of staff awaited us, dressed impeccably, ready to cater to our every need. William stood at the forefront, a tall man with sharp features softened by an inviting smile. His gaze caught on Lucy, and for a second the world seemed to pause. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and rich like aged whiskey. "I'm so pleased you both could join us." He extended his hand to me, a handshake that felt more like an assessment than a greeting. Then, turning to Lucy, he added, "I trust the trip was pleasant." Lucy's smile widened, her cheeks coloring slightly as she replied, "It was wonderful. Thank you for inviting us." The weekend unfolded like an impossible dream. Mornings began with leisurely breakfasts overlooking the sea. Days were filled with activities tailored to the guests' every whim, and nights turned into lavish feasts. William moved through it all with an easy grace, a conductor in this symphony of indulgence. And Lucy followed, orbiting him with the polite interest of a guest mingling with a host. Yet there were moments, those fleeting seconds, when their eyes met and lingered. Saturday evening arrived with a cool breeze and the promise of an elegant dinner. Lucy emerged from our room in that red satin dress, and the sight of her took my breath away. But before I could say anything, William appeared, nodding with approval. "You look stunning, Lucy," he said, voice low enough that it felt like a private compliment. I cleared my throat, stepping closer. "Shall we?" I asked, offering her my arm. She took it, but her touch was light, barely there. As we walked to dinner, the air felt charged with something unsaid, an invisible thread pulling us apart, taut and ready to snap. The night was filled with laughter and conversation, but I sat at the edge of it, watching Lucy, watching William, and feeling the first real stirrings of dread. The sea breeze that night carried with it a chill, the kind that didn't quite reach the skin but sank deeper, spreading discomfort from the inside out. Dinner on the veranda, overlooking the moonlit bay, was an opulent affair. Each plate was a work of art, each glass filled with the finest wine, but the flavors felt muted against the cacophony in my mind. Lucy sat across from me, engaged in conversation with William. His laughter, rich and knowing, resonated, reaching Lucy in a way that made her eyes sparkle. She glanced at me, catching my gaze before quickly looking away. I gripped my fork a bit too tightly, feeling the polished metal edge dig into my palm. "Mark, what do you think?" Jack, our CEO, asked, breaking into my thoughts. He had been discussing new strategies, hoping for my input, but I struggled to focus. "It sounds promising," I replied absently, offering him a practiced nod. My eyes drifted back to Lucy, who was now leaning forward, captivated by something William was saying. I told myself it was paranoia, but paranoia had a weight to it, and this felt heavier, more certain. After dinner, as conversations splintered into smaller groups, William invited us into his private office, a room that matched his reputation, mahogany bookshelves, art that spoke of both sophistication and old money. Lucy and I entered, with William gesturing for me to sit on a leather chair while he poured drinks. Lucy hovered by the window, gazing out at the water, her figure a silhouette against the glass. William handed her a glass of white wine and offered me a tumbler of amber whiskey. "I'm glad you could come," he said, sitting behind a desk that looked more like a throne than a workstation. "I hope you're both enjoying yourselves." "Absolutely," I said, taking a sip, the liquid burning its way down my throat. "This place is incredible." Lucy turned from the window, smiling faintly. "It's more than I could have imagined," she admitted. There it was again, that look between them, subtle but tangible. I wanted to shake my head, dismiss the thought, but it clung stubbornly. William's smile widened, a hint of satisfaction playing on his lips. The silence stretched a little too long. "So, Mark," William began, leaning forward, his hands folded neatly on the desk, "there's something I'd like to discuss. An opportunity that might interest you." I nodded, forcing my attention to him. He spoke of expanding our company's reach, partnering on a new project that could propel us into a different league. It was all logical, exciting even, but my focus waned, shifting back to Lucy, who seemed lost in thought. When we left the office, the sky was inked with stars. Lucy slipped her arm through mine, the contact startling in its likeness. "What did you think?" she asked, her voice soft. "About the project?" I echoed, trying to center myself. She nodded, but there was something distant in her gaze. "It sounds like a solid plan," I replied, glancing at her profile. "You seemed distracted, though." She laughed, but it was brittle. "I suppose I'm just overwhelmed. There's a lot to take in." We walked in silence for a while, past the pool that shimmered with reflections of palm fronds, to our room. As soon as we were inside, Lucy kicked off her heels and reached for her hair, letting the loose curls fall over her shoulders. She was beautiful, no question, and that thought twisted inside me, fueling the discomfort. "Are you okay?" she asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror as she washed off her makeup. "I am. Just a lot on my mind." I kept my tone casual. "Work," she pressed, drying her face and turning to face me. There was a tension in her expression that matched mine, and for a second, it seemed like something might break open between us. But then, she smiled, a practiced smile, and crossed the room to kiss me, the scent of her perfume sharp and familiar. "Don't worry so much, Mark. This weekend is for us." Her touch lingered on my shoulder, and I wanted to believe her. Yet, as she pulled away and busied herself with her phone, that sense of distance remained. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day unfolded under a bright sun that felt almost mocking in its brilliance. Lucy and I joined the other guests at breakfast, William appearing last, exuding confidence in a crisp white shirt. He made his way to Lucy, exchanging pleasantries before catching my eye. "Mark, I was hoping you'd join us for a quick meeting later. We can go over more details about the project," he said, his voice holding the authority of someone used to getting what he wanted. Of course, I agreed, watching as he leaned in close to Lucy, whispering something that made her smile. Private joke, a shared moment. My chest tightened, and for the first time, I felt a flare of something deeper than suspicion. Anger. After breakfast, William and I went to his study. He spoke at length about strategic partnerships, market trends, but my mind was elsewhere. Finally, he paused, fixing me with a curious look. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone dipped with genuine interest. "Yeah, fine," I lied, meeting his gaze. It was hard to tell if he believed me. We wrapped up the conversation, and I excused myself, needing air, space. As I stepped outside, the sun's glare made my eyes water. Or maybe it was something else. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the chaos in my head. That's when I saw Lucy by the pool, sitting on a lounger, her phone in hand, a soft smile playing on her lips as she typed. Later that afternoon, while Lucy was away for a spa treatment arranged by William, I went back to our room. I had never been the kind to pry, to doubt, but today felt different. The thought of who she might be texting gnawed at me until I couldn't resist. Her phone was still on the dresser, half buried under a scarf. I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen lit up, and I took a breath, unlocking it with the passcode that I'd long known but never used this way before. Messages popped up, the usual chatter, friends, work, and then a string of exchanges with an unsaved number. My mouth went dry as I scrolled up, words jumping out, phrases about shared moments, hidden glances, laughter I hadn't been part of. Before I could read more, I heard footsteps approaching the door. I put the phone down hastily and turned to face the window as Lucy walked in, a towel wrapped around her shoulders, her skin flushed from the treatment. "Hey," she said, her smile warm. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. She didn't seem to notice. As she began to talk about her afternoon, I nodded, barely listening. The weekend's sheen had dulled, leaving only the raw edges of reality. I knew now what I had to do. The sun had set behind the horizon, painted in deep purples and blues, and the evening air had a crispness that foretold something inevitable. The weekend was drawing to a close, yet it felt as if time had expanded, each moment stretched taut with the weight of uncertainty. I moved through the motions of mingling, of sipping a drink and offering polite nods as laughter spilled from groups around me. But inside, there was a simmering, restless energy. I knew tonight would be different. Lucy stood by the railing, looking out over the darkening water. The lights from the house cast a warm glow across her figure, highlighting the gold in her hair. She turned when she sensed me approaching, a smile lighting her face. "Mark, there you are," she said, her voice soft but tired. "I was starting to think you'd slipped away." "Just needed some air," I said, my eyes not quite meeting hers. I set my glass on the table and leaned against the railing, close but not touching her. The silence between us felt heavy, filled with the unspoken. I could feel her glancing at me, waiting for me to say something, anything. Finally, she reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Is something bothering you?" Her tone was light, probing, as if she already knew the answer and was testing the waters. I exhaled slowly, turning to face her. "Why don't you tell me?" The words came out quieter than I intended but carried enough weight to make her blink, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "Tell you what?" she asked, but her eyes darted away, betraying the calmness in her voice. "I don't know, Lucy," I said, pushing off the railing and folding my arms. "Maybe why you've been so distracted. Or why you seem to have more to talk about with William than with me." Her face paled slightly, the moonlight casting her features into stark relief. "Mark, are you serious? William is our client. You're reading too much into this." "Am I?" I challenged, the edge in my voice sharper than I'd intended. She flinched, and for a moment, I felt a pang of regret. But it was smothered quickly by the memory of those messages, those hidden smiles. "Look," she began, taking a deep breath, "I won't stand here and let you accuse me of something without any reason. You're being paranoid." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Paranoid? Maybe. But it doesn't change what I saw, Lucy." Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. "What did you see?" I hesitated, the truth thick on my tongue. "Messages," I finally said, watching her reaction. The way her eyes widened for just a split second before she regained her composure spoke louder than any words. "Mark, you shouldn't be going through my phone," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "That's an invasion of my privacy." "Privacy?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Don't talk to me about privacy when I'm trying to understand why my wife is slipping away right in front of me." For a moment, there was only the sound of the sea brushing up against the shore, a gentle, repetitive shush that did nothing to calm the storm inside me. She wrapped her arms around herself as if shielding against a cold only she could feel. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then tell me what it is, Lucy, because from where I'm standing it doesn't look good." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, eyes flickering to the house behind us. The laughter inside felt distant, an echo from another world. "It was just harmless," she said finally, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Harmless," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Those words on your phone, that smile when you looked at him, harmless doesn't quite fit, does it?" She turned away from me, hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It didn't mean anything. It was just a tension, Mark. I was feeling, I don't know, unnoticed. I felt a surge of anger that made my vision swim. You think I haven't noticed? That I don't see how you light up when he walks in? That I haven't felt you pulling away?" Tears shone in her eyes, catching the moonlight. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "And how far is that, Lucy?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "It was just conversations, smiles, some stupid flirting," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. "Nothing physical, nothing that crossed a line." She turned to me, eyes pleading. "I swear, Mark, I never let it get that far." The silence that followed felt immense, as if the night itself had stopped to listen. My chest ached, each breath a struggle. I wanted to believe her, wanted so desperately for those words to be true. But trust was a fragile thing, and ours was already cracked. Before I could respond, the door to the veranda opened, and William stepped out, pausing when he saw us. His expression was neutral, but something flickered in his eyes as he took in our tense stances. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, a small smile playing at his lips. Lucy stiffened, stepping away from me, and that small movement was like a knife twisting deeper. "No," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "We were just talking." William's gaze shifted between us, lingering on Lucy for a second too long. "Well, don't let me stop you," he said, the smile turning almost condescending before he walked back inside. The moment passed, leaving us in the quiet that now felt suffocating. Lucy looked at me, eyes full of things unspoken, apologies that might never be enough. "Mark, please," she whispered. I took a step back, the distance between us feeling like miles. "We'll talk later," I said, my voice hollow. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing under the indifferent moon, the echo of our confrontation ringing in the space between us. The flight home was silent, punctuated only by the occasional drone of the engines and the rustle of papers as Jack read through work notes a few rows ahead. Lucy sat beside me, staring out the window, her expression fixed and unreadable. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing that coiled around every movement and breath. I had run through our confrontation 100 times since that night, the hurt in her voice, the desperation in mine, and the shadow that had fallen over everything since William stepped out onto the veranda. When we landed, the world seemed dimmer, as if the sun itself had taken on the dull, muted hues of doubt. We gathered our bags and nodded mechanically at colleagues as we made our way to the car. The ride home was a blur of traffic lights and asphalt, silence stretching across the small space between us like a chasm. The children were at my parents' house, waiting for us, oblivious to the silent unraveling happening just beneath the surface. Lucy went inside first, her posture rigid as she greeted them with a smile too practiced. I followed, feeling like a stranger in my own life. That evening, as the kids played upstairs, I found Lucy in the kitchen, staring into a half-empty glass of wine. The light over the sink cast her face in harsh relief, and for a moment, she looked as tired as I felt. "We need to talk," I said, breaking the fragile quiet. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, and nodded. We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where we'd laughed over spilled cereal and planned vacations. Now it was a battlefield, holding only silence and the echoes of what we were losing. "I need to know the truth, Lucy," I said finally. "All of it." She flinched as if the words were a blow. "I told you the truth," she whispered. "It was never more than a mistake, Mark. I got caught up in something, in feeling noticed for a change." "Noticed?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "I noticed you, Lucy. I loved you. Maybe I wasn't good at showing it, but I did." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she said, voice cracking. "And I was wrong. I was so wrong." I wanted to believe her, to take those words and patch them over the cracks in my heart. But I couldn't. The wound ran too deep, and the trust we once had felt irreparable. "We can try counseling," she said suddenly, her voice frantic, reaching for anything that might save us. "We can fix this." "Can we?" I said, staring at her. The doubt in my voice seemed to drain the last bit of hope from her eyes. The kids' laughter from upstairs echoed down the stairs, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. My chest ached with the weight of the choice before me. I stood up, not trusting myself to speak further, and turned away. The next days were a haze of polite conversations, shared silences, and moments stolen to avoid looking each other in the eye. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to touch the raw edges of the truth that had cut us so deeply. Even the kids noticed, their questions innocent and probing. "Why do you and Mommy seem sad?" Emma had asked one evening, her wide eyes full of concern. "We're just tired, sweetheart," Lucy had said, her smile brittle. The lie hummed between us like smoke, suffocating. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I sat in my office, staring at an empty page on my laptop, unable to concentrate on work. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Lucy stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Can we go for a walk?" she asked. There was something final in her voice, something resigned. I nodded, pushing myself up with a sigh. We walked in silence down the familiar path behind our house, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of damp earth and approaching winter. "I've been thinking a lot," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost lost in the rustle of the wind. "About us, about what I did. And I realized, I hurt you in a way that can't be fixed." "Lucy," I began, but she shook her head, stopping me. "No, let me finish," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't know how to go back to what we had, Mark. And maybe we can't. Maybe trying will only hurt us more." I swallowed, the knot in my throat tightening painfully. "So what are you saying?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "I'm saying that maybe the best thing we can do for each other, for the kids, is to let go before we destroy everything we've built." The weight of her words settled over us, and for a moment, all I could hear was the wind and the soft rustle of leaves falling around us. I wanted to argue, to fight for the life we had built, but deep down, I knew she was right. The trust had been shattered, and no matter how hard we tried to piece it back together, the fractures would always remain. When we walked back to the house, the decision sat between us, unspoken but understood. That night, as I lay awake listening to her soft, uneven breathing beside me for the last time, I felt a grief that was deeper than anything I'd known. The following morning, we told the kids. They cried, their confusion cutting through me like a knife. Emma clung to Lucy, while Daniel sat, silent and stunned. Lucy held them tightly, whispering reassurances that neither of us fully believed. We separated quietly, with no dramatic farewells or fights. Just a slow, painful unwinding of a life we once shared, until it was just memories we'd pack away and keep in a place we'd only visit in silence. One evening, months later, as I stood outside the house we once called home, I watched through the window as Lucy laughed at something Emma said. The sound didn't reach me, but the sight of her smile, genuine for the first time in so long, twisted in my chest. The wind whispered around me, carrying the scent of rain and the quiet echo of what we had lost. I turned away, walking into the night, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, the cold biting at my skin. A life left behind, an unexpected end to a story that began with promises whispered in the dark. And as the rain started to fall, mingling with the tears I could no longer hold back, I let myself mourn. Now start next story. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. I had always trusted Sarah. In the 10 years we'd been married, I considered us a team, each other's confidants, partners, and best friends. We had built a life I thought was solid, with steady careers, a modest home, and mutual dreams for the future. But in the weeks leading up to that fateful weekend, everything started to change. Sarah became distant, almost as if she drifted into a world where I didn't exist. The little things tipped me off at first, the constant messaging on her phone, the nervous way she'd keep it face down, even around me. And then, it was her sudden fixation on her appearance. Sarah had always been naturally beautiful to me, the kind of person who didn't need makeup or flashy clothes to shine. But lately, she was wearing new outfits, applying makeup before she even went to work, and ordering high-end perfume that she used sparingly yet noticeably. New perfume, I asked one morning as she brushed past me on her way out the door. She barely made eye contact. "Yeah, a gift from a friend," she replied, her voice clipped. I wanted to believe her. Maybe she just wanted to spice things up, perhaps impress someone at work for a promotion. I shrugged it off, reminding myself that people could be complicated, even if they didn't always let you in on their reasons. But it wasn't just her appearance. Her schedule seemed scattered, filled with work dinners and late nights at the office. I didn't want to be that guy, the husband who questioned every move his wife made. But my gut wouldn't settle. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this tension in my chest, a prickling unease I couldn't shake. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if my insecurities were just paranoia. But then came the work trip. We were sitting at the breakfast table, both scrolling through our phones. It was a Friday, a day we usually looked forward to. But as I scrolled, sipping my coffee. She looked up at me, her expression calm, detached. "I've got a work trip this weekend," she said, not even glancing up. "Last-minute thing. Sorry, I know we had plans." A hollow pit opened in my stomach. "Oh, where are you going?" Kept my tone light, casual. "Some conference in the city," she replied, waving it off. "Just an overnight thing, nothing exciting." She went back to her phone, almost as if she was hoping I wouldn't pry any further. "All right," I replied, trying to sound neutral. I forced a smile and nodded. "Maybe we can have a quiet night in when you get back." "Yeah, sure," she mumbled, her fingers still dancing over her screen, her eyes never meeting mine. I wanted to believe her, but the feeling was back, stronger than before, gnawing at me. A little voice in my head whispered that something was wrong, and this time, I couldn't ignore it. As she left the room, I followed her with my eyes, watching her toss a new weekend bag into the back seat of her car. She'd never packed for a trip so quickly, so efficiently. She even smiled to herself as she got in, a rare, relaxed smile, as if she were genuinely excited about her conference. It was then that I knew. I didn't want to know, but I knew. And with that, I became a man I didn't recognize, driven by suspicion, compelled to dig into her private world, looking for evidence to confirm what my heart was already telling me. When she left that afternoon, I waited, letting her put some distance between us before I pulled out my phone. I hadn't dared to do this before. I thought if I didn't look too closely, maybe my suspicions would turn out to be unfounded, that I could pretend our marriage was as strong as I wanted it to be. But not anymore. I opened the location-sharing app we'd set up years ago, meant for emergencies, and there it was, her current location clear as day. I watched her little blue on the map, following her trail as she drove, heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly. I had half expected her to head toward her office or some conference center in the city, but she didn't. Instead, she was headed out of town, the dot moving steadily away, further and further, until it finally stopped by the coast, 2 hours away from where she claimed to be. She was staying at a hotel, the same hotel where we'd spent an anniversary once, a romantic getaway overlooking the beach. She was there with someone else, reliving our memories with a stranger. The weight of the betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, trying to make sense of it, hoping for some innocent explanation, even though I knew there wasn't one. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. The minutes ticked by, and I could feel the rage simmering, transforming my grief into something sharper. I wanted to confront her, to burst into that hotel room and watch her face crumble as I exposed her betrayal. But there was another part of me, the calculating part, that held me back. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done, to let the truth break her the way she'd broken me. So I planned deliberately and meticulously. I spent the entire night consumed by the realization that Sarah had been living a double life. My heart swam wildly between raw pain and steely resolve. Each memory of us together now felt like a betrayal, each laugh, each kiss, all tainted by the deceit that lay just beneath the surface. But instead of falling apart, I found myself growing colder, my emotions hardening into a quiet determination. If Sarah had made this choice, I would make one of my own. I wasn't about to simply confront her and let her walk away from this with nothing but a bruised ego. No, I would make her understand what betrayal felt like, what it truly meant to break someone who had given everything for the relationship. I would make her feel it all. The weekend was long, and I went through it in a haze, occasionally checking her location on the app just to confirm what I already knew. She stayed in that same place all weekend, no deviation, not even for a late-night drive back home. That hotel by the beach, our beach, was now tainted in my mind, a silent witness to a betrayal that could never be forgiven. When she finally came home Sunday night, it was almost as if she wore an air of victory. She walked into the house as though nothing had happened, greeted me with a casual kiss on the cheek, and set her bag down by the door. I could barely hold back the disgust rising within me as I watched her, calm and collected, acting like the loving wife she had so clearly chosen not to be. "How was your weekend?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, long and boring. Conferences aren't what they used to be," she said with a forced laugh, tossing her coat onto the rack. You wouldn't believe how dull some of those sessions can get. I forced myself to smile, nodding in mock sympathy. Sounds rough. You should get some rest. Definitely, she replied, already heading upstairs without a backward glance. As she disappeared into our bedroom, I clenched my fists, feeling the fury rise within me. But I let it simmer, knowing that confronting her now would be letting her off easy. I would bide my time. The next day, while she was at work, I set my plan in motion. I gathered the evidence I would need, copies of our bank statements, phone bills, anything that could support the narrative I was piecing together. I even made a call to a private investigator. I needed more than just suspicions to back me up when the time came. I wanted proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that she'd broken her vows. Within a week, I had it. I knew the name of her lover, where he worked, and even when they met. They'd been seeing each other for months, meeting up whenever they could steal a weekend away, claiming work obligations on her end and business trips on his. It was clear she hadn't stumbled into an affair. This was calculated, planned, or recurring betrayal. Each new piece of information stung, yet strengthened my resolve. I decided the confrontation would happen at her birthday party. She was turning 35, and I had spent weeks preparing the perfect event, inviting friends and family, setting up decorations, and even renting a venue in the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me, how she probably thought I was oblivious, bending over backward to make her special day unforgettable, while all the while she'd been betraying me. But I knew that night would be unforgettable, just not in the way she'd imagined. On the night of the party, everything was perfect. The guests arrived early, bringing gifts and gathering around, complimenting the decorations. Sarah beamed as she greeted everyone, her smile wide, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I watched her from across the room, noting how she moved between guests, laughing, taking pictures, playing the role of the doting wife and friend as though nothing was amiss. Once everyone had settled in, I moved to the front of the room, where a projector was set up, ready for the slideshow I'd prepared. I clinked my glass, calling everyone's attention, and announced that we had something special prepared for Sarah. A little trip down memory lane, a slideshow of our years together. Sarah looked at me, her eyes warm with gratitude, and I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered the nights she'd spent away, the lies, the betrayal that had shattered my trust. And so, with a steady hand, I began the presentation. The first few slides were innocuous, pictures from our wedding, vacations we'd taken, memories shared over the years. Everyone watched, laughing and smiling as the memories flashed by. Sarah looked delighted, glowing as she saw moments from our past on display. But then the slides changed. Photos from her work trips appeared, zoomed-in images of her and a man I'd come to recognize as her lover. The mood in the room shifted, laughter fading into stunned silence as people realized what they were seeing. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She glanced around the room, eyes wide, searching for an escape that wasn't there. And then, she looked at me, her face pale, pleading silently for me to stop. But I continued. The next slide showed a photo taken by the private investigator, a grainy shot of her and her lover embracing at the hotel. I could hear gasps around the room, murmurs of disbelief, and a few people exchanging horrified glances. Sarah's closest friends stared at her, mouths open, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the person on the screen. By the time the slideshow ended, Sarah was trembling, her hands clutching her arms as though trying to hold herself together. I let the silence linger for a moment, letting the weight of what she'd done sink in. I wanted her to feel every ounce of shame, every drop of regret. She had made her choices, and now, surrounded by the people she'd deceived, she would finally understand the consequences. As the lights came back on, I turned to her, my face calm, my voice steady. "Happy birthday, Sarah. I hope you enjoyed the memories." She tried to speak, but no words came. The room was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Some of our friends looked at the floor, some at me, but most stared at her, waiting for an explanation that would never come. It was over. In a matter of minutes, I had stripped away the facade she'd carefully built and left her standing there, exposed, with nothing to shield her from the truth. Finally, she found her voice, barely a whisper. Why would you do this? I held her gaze unflinching. Why did you? With that, I walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage of our life, the life she'd chosen to shatter. Leaving Sarah in that room filled with silent, stunned faces, I felt a rush of vindication. For months, I'd carried the weight of suspicion, then the devastating truth, alone. Now, finally, the burden was no longer mine. Everyone knew, and the facade was gone. The life we'd built together, one I once thought unbreakable, was irrevocably shattered. But even in my quiet satisfaction, there was a hollow feeling settling in, an emptiness that revenge hadn't quite filled. I drove home alone, the silence of the car oppressive, every tick of the turn signal reminding me of the moments ahead, the divorce, the division of property, and the life that would soon become my past. But at that moment, I didn't want to think about what came next. I just wanted to leave it all behind, if only for a night. When I arrived home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, letting its warmth dull the edges of the night's events. Sitting there, staring out into the darkness, I replayed everything that had happened in those few intense moments, trying to make sense of my feelings. I had wanted her to feel the pain she'd caused me, to watch her crumble under the weight of her own choices. And she had. Yet it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. I thought back to the slideshow, to the horrified looks on the faces of our friends and family. For years, they'd believed in us as the perfect couple. The betrayal wasn't just mine to bear. It had spilled over, touching everyone who had been part of our lives. The knowledge stung, but I had done what I came to do, and the truth was out. That would have to be enough. The next day, the fallout began. Sarah showed up at the house, her face red, her eyes swollen from crying, pleading for a chance to talk. I watched her from the other side of the room, feeling the weight of her betrayal still simmering inside me, cooling now into something more distant, almost detached. Please let me explain, she said, her voice cracking. I know what I did was horrible. I messed up, but I still love you. Do you? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Because love doesn't look like what you've done. She flinched, her shoulders slumping as if the reality of her choices had finally settled on her. I was confused, and he made me feel alive. But that doesn't mean I wanted to lose you. You have to believe me. I let out a bitter laugh. Sarah, if you wanted to be with me, you could have been. But you didn't. You chose him over and over again. You lied, you betrayed me, and not just once. This wasn't a mistake, it was a decision you made time after time. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, her voice muffled by her fingers. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, Sarah. Because you did, I replied, unable to mask the anger that had been building inside me for so long. You hurt me and you hurt yourself. But now you want to act like none of it mattered, that it was all just some stupid mistake. I shook my head. I'm not buying it. Not anymore. She lifted her head, her eyes shining with tears. I know I can't change what I did, but maybe we could start over. I stared at her, struggling to comprehend how she could think there was any way back from this. The life we built was gone, replaced by lies and deceit, by a version of her I barely recognized. The woman sitting before me wasn't the one I promised to love and protect. This was someone else, someone who had betrayed me at every turn. You want to start over? I asked, incredulous. Sarah, there is no starting over from this. You burned that bridge the first time you lied to me, and every time after that. Her face crumpled, and she began to sob, her body shaking with the weight of her regret. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not anymore. I had loved her once, had shared every part of myself with her. But that was over. She had destroyed whatever love I had for her, leaving only the hollow shell of a marriage. Eventually, she stood, wiping her eyes. I understand, she whispered, barely audible. I'll go. She turned to leave, hesitating at the doorway. If there's ever a chance, she began, but I cut her off. There won't be, I said firmly. And with that, she walked out, the door closing softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter was closing, and there was no going back. I had thought that ending things would feel like liberation, that I would feel lighter, free. But instead, I felt like I had lost something irreplaceable, even though it had been broken beyond repair. Over the next few days, I began to make arrangements for the divorce. The process was brutal, each decision cutting deeper, turning our shared life into a ledger of assets to be split, memories reduced to numbers and logistics. I could feel her desperation with each meeting, her attempts to negotiate, to find some way to salvage what we had lost. But I remained resolute, unwilling to compromise on the one thing that could never be salvaged: my trust. Friends reached out, offering sympathy, even support, but I kept them at a distance. I couldn't bear to rehash the details of the betrayal, to see the pity in their eyes. I had already exposed Sarah's secret to them, shown them the cracks in the life we'd built. I didn't need to keep reliving it. One evening, as I sifted through the remnants of our marriage, the photos, the shared possessions, the memories, I found myself lingering over a picture from our early years together. It was from our honeymoon, taken on a sunny beach, both of us laughing, oblivious to the future that lay ahead. I couldn't help but wonder if there had been signs even then, subtle indicators that I'd missed or chosen to ignore. I stared at the photo until the image blurred, my mind drifting into memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. But those memories weren't mine anymore, not in the way they once were. The past we'd shared had become a fiction, something that had never truly existed, not in the way I'd believed. And as I held the picture in my hand, I knew it was time to let it go, to leave the past where it belonged. I packed up the photos, the mementos, and everything that reminded me of the life I'd once thought was real. It was painful, a process of unmaking, of dismantling a part of myself that I had invested so much in. But as I placed the last box in the closet, a strange calm settled over me. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet in its wake, a blank slate that I could now rebuild on my own terms. The night before the divorce was finalized, I sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The emptiness I had felt began to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like mine again. And as the darkness settled around me, I let go of the last fragments of anger, of betrayal, of the life that could never be. I knew I would heal, and that someday, I would look back on this moment as the start of something new, a life untouched by deceit, a life finally free. The months after the divorce felt like coming up for air after being submerged for too long. I took small steps toward rebuilding my life, rediscovering old hobbies, spending more time with friends, and slowly reclaiming my sense of self. Sarah had been my world for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to make decisions solely for myself. And as I settled into this new phase, I found a quiet, steady peace that I hadn't known I needed. But the relief didn't last long. One morning, as I sifted through the usual stack of mail, I noticed a crisp white envelope, the kind used for formal correspondence. No return address. I opened it slowly, curiosity pricking at the edges of my calm. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with words printed neatly in the center. "You don't know the whole story." My pulse quickened. My first thought was that it had to be from Sarah. Maybe she wanted to explain herself, or maybe it was one last attempt to pull me back into her life. But the lack of a return address felt off, unsettling. It didn't seem like her style. I threw the note away, chalking it up to a random, tasteless joke. I'd come too far to let a single letter drag me back into a chapter one had closed. A few weeks later, I was back at my usual cafe, the one I'd started frequenting in my newfound solitude. It was a peaceful place, my little escape, where I could read or work on my laptop, immersing myself in anything but my past. But as I was paying for my coffee, the barista handed me another note, this time folded and slipped under my cup. I looked around, confused, but the cafe was empty except for a couple at a far table. My heart thudded as I unfolded the note. "There are things you need to know about Sarah. A chill ran down my spine. This couldn't be a coincidence. Whoever was leaving these notes was close, paying attention. They knew my routines. But why? Why now? Despite myself, curiosity got the better of me. That night, I pulled out my phone, hesitating before finally dialing Sarah's number for the first time since the divorce was finalized. She picked up on the third ring, her voice uncertain. "Hello? Sarah. It's me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you send me something? A note?" "No," she replied, her voice sharper than I expected. "Why would I do that? We're done. Remember?" The line went silent as I tried to read her, to pick up any hint of dishonesty. But there was nothing. She sounded genuinely baffled. "All right," I said, barely concealing my frustration. "Forget it." After we hung up, the questions knotted me. If it wasn't Sarah, then who was it? And what were they trying to tell me? The following morning, I received a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Meet me at the Davenport Cafe. Noon tomorrow. You deserve to know the truth." The line went dead. The Davenport Cafe was a small spot across town, a place I hadn't been to in years. My hands trembled slightly as I hung up. This had gone from unsettling to downright eerie. But my gut told me I needed to see this through. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a seat by the window where I could see everyone who came in. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more far-fetched than the last. But just as I was beginning to lose hope, a woman approached my table. She was tall, slender, with dark hair and an aura of confidence. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Are you the one who called me?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. She nodded, sitting down across from me. "My name is Jessica. I work with Sarah, or rather, I used to." The mention of Sarah's name put me on edge. "What do you want from me?" I asked, struggling to keep my patience. "I'm here to tell you what Sarah didn't," Jessica replied, her tone calm, almost clinical. "I tried to convince her to tell you, but she wouldn't listen. She was too afraid." "Afraid of what?" I demanded, my frustration spilling over. What could she possibly have kept from me after everything she did? Jessica leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Afraid you'd find out that her affair was a cover, that she was doing it to protect you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to make sense of what she was saying. To protect me? From what? Jessica took a deep breath. The man she was seeing wasn't just her lover. He was someone powerful, someone who had influence over her job and over your life. He knew things about you, things that could ruin you. Sarah went along with the relationship to keep him away from you, to keep him from targeting you and your family. The room spun as her words sank in. It was too much to process, too twisted to be true. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. "This sounds like something out of a bad thriller." Jessica reached into her bag and handed me a stack of papers, thick and bound together. "This is a file on him, on everything he's done to keep Sarah in line. Bank records, emails, threats." She gathered them as evidence, hoping that one day she could walk away from him for good. She just didn't expect it to blow up the way it did. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I read the details. There were emails, surveillance photos, even payment receipts that traced back to the man she'd been seeing. It was all there, laid out before me, a puzzle whose pieces clicked together in a sickening realization. Jessica continued, her voice softening. "Sarah never told you because she thought she could handle it on her own. But as things spiraled out of control, she realized that she'd made a terrible mistake. She wanted to keep you safe, but instead, she lost you." I couldn't breathe, the weight of what I was reading pressing down on me like a tidal wave. The months of anger, of betrayal, suddenly felt hollow, built on a lie I had never understood. And Sarah, I had hated her, despised her for what she'd done, without ever knowing why. Jessica watched me, her expression unreadable. She didn't think you'd ever forgive her, even if you knew the truth. But she wanted you to know it wasn't as simple as you thought. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, trying to process everything. The woman I had once loved, The woman I thought had destroyed me had sacrificed herself to protect me in ways I hadn't known. I didn't know whether to feel relief, sorrow, or something in between. Finally, I looked up at Jessica. Where is she now? She left town after the divorce, trying to put as much distance between her and him as possible. She knew she couldn't keep the charade up anymore, not after everything fell apart. As I left the cafe, the world outside felt different, unsteady beneath my feet. The life I thought I'd understood had been a shadow, cast by truths that I hadn't been ready to face. I didn't know what would come next, or if I'd ever see Sarah again. But one thing was clear: the story of our marriage was not what I'd thought. And somewhere, deep down, a part of me wondered if it was possible to start again, this time with all the cards on the table.